Hello and welcome back to the Golden Fanfics. I hope you enjoyed today's very special video. What if Deku was Chainsaw Man? Made by Just Low. And the story will be linked in the description like always. So leave a like, subscribe, and comment for another part. Now let's get into the fanfic. The Devil You Know. Chapter 20. A silken surface brushes against Izuku's fingertips. Starting with his thumb and pinky, all 5 digits fold and his hand grasps at an empty space. Still somnolent, the boy sluggishly stirs in his bed with a groggy groan before reaching for the spot beside him again. Izuku's hand passes through air a second time before slapping the sheets. Though soft, there isn't the usual fuzz that he's familiar with. His eyes blink open, and though bleary, he has a visual confirmation. Pochita is missing. Izuku springs up straight, his mattress straining under the sudden movement. The fogginess clears from his head and his eyes. Now fully awake, the boy scours the room with his gaze for his dog, double-checking his bed. When he doesn't catch even a glimpse of Orange, he tosses the All Might-themed blankets that cover him onto the floor and darts from his bed. He fumbles with the doorknob only momentarily before throwing it open and sprinting down the hall. "Mom? Mom?" Izuku calls for his mother as he stumbles over his own stubby legs. He finds Inko in the kitchen cooking breakfast for him. She greets him with a smile, but the expression quickly evaporates when she sees the face her son is making. Pochita is missing. Izuku explains his state of panic before she can even ask. Inko glances over her son's shoulder, half expecting the dog to be there despite his exclamation. When her eyes shift back downwards and land on Izuku's watery ones, she bends down to console him. "Oh dear, let's not panic. I'm sure he didn't go very far," she tries soothing him by running a hand through his green curls, but the young boy is already sniffling. "Do you think he ran away? What if a villain got him?" There's no holding back the waterworks, and Inko has to hold him close so that he can dry his tears on her apron. She shushes him assuredly and rocks him side to side like she would when he was an infant to calm him down. When his whines revert back to snivels, she lets him have some space to breathe. "Pochita loves you too much to run away, and he's got that chainsaw of his to fend off villains." Inko's words must do the trick since Izuku nods along with that line of reasoning. She stands up to grab the phone off the wall and dials Mitsuki's number. "I'll ask the neighbors if they saw anything, and we'll walk around to see if he wandered off." Inko already starts formulating a plan to find the family pet and prevent a relapse of her son's sobbing. "We can then print flyers if Pochita still doesn't turn up." "Oh okay," Izuku wipes away the tears streaming down his freckled cheeks before puffing them up and getting a determined glint in his glossy gaze. "I'll get us started then." Before Inko can even respond, he's flying into the backyard to begin his search. "Shut the fuck up, brat." Inko jumps when the line clicks and she hears Mitsuki screaming at the top of her lungs. Faintly, Kitsuki shouts something back that doesn't quite reach the phone. "You're lucky I didn't get an abortion." The yelling match continues for a bit before Mitsuki suddenly switches her tone to be as polite as possible. "Hi Inko. I saw your caller ID. How's Izuku?" Inko sweat drops before wiping the side of her forehead with the back of her hand. "He's doing well. Sorta." There's a pause in her speech pattern when the boy hurriedly flies past her to search the living room. "You haven't happened to see Pochita around, have you? That stray you took in?" "Can't say I have." There's a rustle of movement before Mitsuki adds, "Let me ask Masaru and Kitsuki." Inko patiently waits as she listens to the short interaction between wife and husband before wincing when it comes to the son's turn. "Oi, shithead. Have you seen Izuku's mutt?" Mitsuki and Kitsuki exchange some rude words before she shifts back to Inko and says, "Sorry, but it doesn't look like anyone saw him." That's fine. Izuku and I are going to have a look around the neighborhood, but please let us know if Pochita turns up at your house somehow." Inko sighs and shakes her head when Izuku pops his head in to check for an update on the phone call. Izuku pouts a little but doesn't cry. He goes back to searching the house. "Of course, Inko. We'll be on the lookout." Mitsuki's assurance puts a small smile on Inko's face before she hangs up the phone. Though just a glimmer, there's some hope that her friend can help. She repeats that rise and fall of faith with each phone call that she makes after that. "Nobody saw him." Izuku squeaks with disappointment when his mother reports the progress she made. Tears threaten to spill again, but he holds them back as best as he can. He's a small dog. That makes him easy to go unnoticed. Inko does her best to rationalize the situation for her son, while making sure that she has all the right content she needs in her purse in order to go out, but now everyone knows to keep an eye out. Izuku remembers the time that his mom dressed up as a pirate for Halloween and let him try on her eye patch. Without both of his eyes, Pochita was very difficult to keep track of. The small dog would weave between his legs and trip him up. Comparing that memory with now, he can understand her reasoning. And plus we're gonna look for him. He adds. That's right, Inko nods with a smile. She slides her arms into the sleeves of her coat before helping Izuku with his. I'm sure he'll come running if he hears us calling his name. Except, that doesn't happen. The two search the entire neighborhood for the whole day, retracing their steps a few times just to be sure. They call Pochita's name, but he doesn't come running like Inko thought he would. Izuku becomes discouraged and starts sobbing. Eventually, he cries himself out and Inko has to carry him home. When she lays Izuku down in his bed, he absent-mindedly grasps at the air during his slumber. Inko realizes that her son is reaching for his lost dog and has to fight back her own tears. My poor boy. She contemplates giving him a pillow to fill the void, but knows that he'd probably notice the difference and wake up. All she can do for him is let him sleep and hope that Pochita turns up in the morning. Suddenly, Inko hears a whimper. For a moment, she worries that it's her son. But then she feels something soft brushing against her ankles and looks down. There, crawling out from underneath the bed, is Pochita. The short dog's eyes wobble, and she can tell that the animal has been crying too. This whole time, Pochita was at home hiding and waiting for them to get back. You goofballs. Inko chokes back a laugh. She helps the dog up onto the bed so that it can curl up with her son. The boy and his pet worried one another sick over nothing. What am I gonna do with you two? She keeps her voice low to a whisper so that she doesn't wake them up. The two cuddle and Izuku's face forms a smile when he's able to wrap his arms around Pochita. The rapid beating of Izuku's panicked heart settles into a mellow tune when he feels Pochita's warmth against his chest. Chapter 21. Another flurry of coughs, thick and fast as the previous fits had been, completely racked the thin frame of All Might's deflated form. He holds a napkin to his mouth, catching splatters of blood to keep it from spewing out uncontrollably. Despite the involuntary wince, Izuku can't help but continue to marvel at his idol anyways. The hero Itaku silently mouths, oh. He's just like me, for real. All Might is too busy dabbing residual specks of blood from his lips to notice, only looking up after he's pocketed the sullied tissue. My apologies, young man. As I was saying, this true form of mine is significantly weaker than the one that you and the general public are used to seeing. He shifts uncomfortably from his position in the armrest across from Izuku, before clearing his throat and continuing, because of how vulnerable I am in this weakened state, you can imagine why this is such a closely guarded secret. Not just for my own benefit, but so that the public doesn't panic. Izuku numbly nods, still on autopilot since they were evacuated from the USJ. After medical examiners looked him over, he'd been given a blood transplant in order to recuperate. And now, during the meantime while he waits for his mother to come pick him up, All Might whisks him away for a private conversation in the teacher's lounge to avoid prying eyes or ears. How did you get like this? Or were you always? Izuku lets the question linger in the air once he realizes he might have accidentally insulted his hero. The blonde responds with a solemn smile before lifting the hem of his shirt to reveal a gnarly cicatrix. The scarring is so severe that it still appears to be bruised, the spider web of color spiraling towards a more gruesome mark of injury. I received this 5 years ago in the toughest battle I ever had with a villain. Izuku feels his stomach drop, as though the wound is his own. My respiratory system is in shambles, and several surgery operations only allows me a minimum of 3 hours a day to perform hero work. 5 years ago. Izuku swallows a lump in his throat, but another one forms right behind it when he remembers which villains All Might fought during that time period. Did Toxic Chainsaw do that to you? The boy pales at the thought. After years of ridicule, of having his absent father's identity brought into question and accused of being that fiend, he can't help but feel guilty for some reason. Izuku is relieved when All Might chuckles and shakes his head. Toxic Chainsaw could hardly manage this, but you know your hero trivia well. The blonde lowers his shirt back down, covering the massive scar. The villain that I'm referring to is much worse, so much worse that I made certain the public would never know of his existence, only dwellers of the underworld would hear whispers. Izuku leans back in disbelief, his body sinking into the cushion of his own armchair. He can't possibly imagine a villain so powerful, one at the same level of All Might, one capable of inflicting such damage. Why you defeated him though? Right. Izuku breathlessly asks. All Might offers an assuring smile, but it wavers ever so slightly when he answers, nobody will ever be put in danger by that monster ever again. The hero's gaze falls to his thin fingers that curl over to form a fist. I made sure of it. Izuku's eyes widen when he ponders the implications of that answer. But he nods in understanding once the initial shock fades away. It's not actually all that surprising once he thinks about it. The boy finds himself staring at his own hands. The hands that sprout chainsaws. He recalls 13's speech about the power of quirks and raises his head to ask, did you kill him? All Might's mouth droops, no longer holding a smile. We never found a body. Izuku shudders at the implication of that, but I caved his face in the last I saw it, and he finds himself torn between gawking or tightening his jaw when he learns more. All his life, Izuku had made up in his mind a perfect image of the hero in front of him. He had idolized All Might his entire youth, somehow having not once considered the symbol of peace anything other than a symbol. Now though, the boy can see the strained wrinkles edging the corners of the man's mouth, and he knows that the broad smile All Might usually flashes is phony. The man is just a man. He's human. Izuku's hand finds itself over his heart, fingers brushing against the string attached to his sternum beneath the fabric of his shirt. Without Pachita, he'd have been just as human. I can tell from your expression that there's something on your mind, All Might's voice cuts through the boy's thoughts. Startled, Izuku sits up straighter. I'm sorry, sensei, it's just. Izuku wets his lips as he carefully chooses his words, I used to be quirkless. And it's All Might's posture that stiffens next. Izuku's face crunches up as he shifts his gaze to the floor. And I'm somehow only now realizing people are more than just what their quirks make them to be. The moment of silence passes between them, All Might nodding despite the boy's eyes being set elsewhere. It's hard for people to not be influenced by their quirks, especially when certain kinds are classified or categorized in one particular group or the other, but it's important for us to remember all quirks are dangerous. All Might leans forward like he's sharing a secret, but his voice is hardly a whisper, even if it's not as boisterous as when he speaks when in his muscle form. Izuku closes his eyes, visualizing in his mind the scene where he had always been bullied. Kaken and his cronies would drag him under the overpass of the canal in Musatafu when they'd say his quirk makes him a villain. Izuku's eyes snap open, seeking All Might's desperately as he inquires, but the reason UK killed that villain was because his quirk was too dangerous to keep him around, right? The man blinks, breaking the eye contact. Slowly, he somehow deflates even further after hearing that question. All Might leans back and closes his eyes, releasing a somber sigh. Then, his tone switches to something Izuku had never heard All Might sound like. He was called All for One, the words carry a heavy weight to them. Izuku's mouth twitches, facial muscles forcibly willing him to repeat in a hushed whisper, All for One. He shudders while testing the name on his tongue. Every syllable stings with a bitter taste. Because he would take people's quirks all for himself, All Might's explanation leaves an after flavor in the boy's mouth that makes him worry about vomiting, the ability to take quirks. I shouldn't say there is such a thing as a villain's quirk, young Midoriya, just that a quirk can become villainous. Should it belong to someone villainous, the usually righteous blue eyes of the number one hero suddenly hold a very dark gaze, and that man. Izuku is forced to look away again, unable to meet the stare. He fidgets, feeling as though the glare is directed at him. So you're saying that a quirk can be given to the wrong person, that it's not the quirk itself that's bad? When All Might doesn't respond right away, Izuku chances a peek at the hero. The blonde appears pensive but settles on an answer. I suppose that is what I'm saying. Before Izuku can dwell on that response for even a second, All Might clears his throat and continues, speaking of which, this whole thing about giving a quirk to the right or wrong person. Well, I wanted to share with you another big secret. Izuku blinks back his surprise, shocked to hear that there's somehow more to know about his idol. He certainly doesn't expect. I was quirkless once too, young Midoriya. You? Izuku's eyes nearly pop out of his skull. No way. Yes, All Might's small smile matches his humored tone, but that quickly dissipates when he begins to elaborate. The origin of my quirk is actually related to All for One. A quirk passed down to fight him for generations that accumulate strength with each user. The stockpiling quirk. Izuku finds himself absent-mindedly filling in the blanks, but quickly clamps his mouth shut when he realizes he accidentally interrupted All Might. That's right, though the hero doesn't seem to mind. He scratches at the disheveled hair atop his head before saying, and my time is coming to an end. Soon, I will need to find my successor. Izuku falls back in his seat, feeling struck. All Might's end isn't something he ever conceived possible. Let alone the symbol of peace searching for a successor. That's why you started teaching at UA. He finds himself filling in more blanks the more that he thinks about it. I wanted to see the next generation of heroes for myself and make a decision depending on who is worthy. All Might slowly raises his hand up. Izuku is surprised to find a finger attached at the end of that hand, and that finger is pointed at him. Young Midoriya, I believe you have what it takes to receive my quirk. Me? Izuku's eyes almost burst this time. He rubs at them, mistaking them for his ears as he wonders if he's hearing things correctly. All Might chuckles, amused by the reaction. Well, you've proven yourself to be quite. No. But Izuku has tears in his eyes that keep coming, no matter how much he tries to wipe them away. No. All Might leans forward in his seat and then back as he tries to decide how to properly respond to the situation. His frail fingers fidget as he ponders whether or not he should comfort Izuku with a hug. But first, he waits for an explanation. Izuku croaks out a weak noise as his voice dies in his throat. When he recovers, he speaks with a trembling whisper, remember when I said I was quirkless? Yes, you. All Might's sunken eyes broaden the depth of their pits when he tries to come to a conclusion on his own. Did you receive your quirk? Not from him. But Izuku is quick to debunk the man's theory. The boy's body shakes as he tries to get himself under control. Izuku finds his hands placing themselves against his chest to feel the thrumming of his heart. This quirk. It came from my dog, believe it or not. The tail attached to his sternum touches the tips of his fingers. I already feel like I did nothing to deserve this one, and now. How could I take another? Izuku raises his head so that his watery gaze can find All Might's blue orbs. The hero hums as he considers Izuku's story. He then leans forward, reaching out to place a hand on the boy's shoulder. It seems to me your dog saw the same thing that I see in you. All Might gives Izuku a soft squeeze of assurement, but I understand why you're so hesitant. When the hero's hand slips away, Izuku can still feel the warmth radiating off his idol's touch. I'm sorry that I sprung such a big decision on you so suddenly. That was inconsiderate of me. And no, don't apologize. I think you should still consider the others in my class. Izuku shows that he's ashamed with an apologetic bow for denying his idol's offer nevertheless. Before All Might can tell Izuku to raise his head, the door to the lounge swings open and another one of the UA student's teachers enters. Am I interrupting something? Aizawa raises a brow as he takes in the scene with tired eyes. Izuku finds himself impulsively staring at the layer of stitches holding together the fresh scar across his teacher's cheek. The Nomu at the USJ had torn open Aizawa's mouth, leaving a lasting mark on the underground hero's face. Aizawa's gaze flicks towards Izuku, making the boy jump in his seat. Quickly, Izuku looks away. He hopes he didn't come across as impolite. Not at all. Actually, we were just finishing our conversation. Luckily, All Might saves him by drawing Aizawa's attention with a gesture. I'm sure young Midoriya's mother is here by now. Izuku stands up, taking his other teacher's cue. Although, he adds for extra measure to make up for staring, it's good to see you back on your feet again, sensei. Aizawa makes a noise that sounds like a cross between a scoff and a huff, but still gives his student an appreciative nod. Don't keep your mother waiting, Midoriya. He steps aside for the boy to pass, but doesn't forget to add, and remember that you'll be joining Class B tomorrow, so be sure to speak with Vlad, he'll be your temporary homeroom teacher for that day. Izuku bites back his instinctual reaction of shock that classes will still carry on per usual, despite the villain attack, instead responding with a forced smile and a nod. Yes, sensei. He had been hoping to postpone the inevitable. Well, he does manage to get away from his usual classmates tomorrow. He recalls the way Shiozaki reacted. As Izuku walks down the long corridor of UA, he can't help but dread what the other hero students of Class 1B will have to say about his quirk, now that his secret is out. Chapter 22. It's a letter, covered by copious crease lines from having been folded and unfolded, all of them fluffy to the outside. The envelope, however, had arrived in pristine condition. A red dot of sealing wax with the UA logo punctuated by melted curves had made it appear as though it traveled through a steam press, rather than by the hand transference of teacher to student. A thin piece of paper is soft to the touch in Izuku's trembling hand, the handwriting done with black ink, having run through the singular page. The boy's eyes roam the strokes of the pen markings, narrowed to a squint as they take in the strong lines and heavy marks. Aizawa had informed the hero in training that one of his peers had wanted the message delivered upon dropping out of the hero course. His sensei had tried saying the USJ was the causality of the hero potential quitting, but a personalized note addressed to Izuku tells the boy otherwise. He had expected some sort of backlash reaction from his classmates, and this is just the starting opinion of one, but Izuku still feels overwhelmed by the reality of the situation. His eyelids will themselves closed, but he forces them to reopen so that he can read the letter. Can you grow a chainsaw from your dick? Minoru Mineta. Izuku's hand folds over the piece of paper, crumbling it into a ball that fits within the confinement of his tight fist. His tremors of anxiety shift to angry shakes, and he grits his teeth to keep from yelling. Instead, a bitter laugh comes out. Whether the question was sincere or it was meant to be some sort of crude comment as a bullying parting shot, Izuku shakes it off with a shake of his head. His usual class aside, he still has to face an entirely separate hero course, and they're more up close and personal than a note. He shoves the paperweight into his blazer pocket before steeling himself to walk through the door of Class 1B. The blonde blur clears the distance between the classroom entrance and the collection of desks residing within, the source of that brisk movement, stopping short a nose width apart from Izuku. He tries not to flinch, but fails to keep himself from taking a step back. The boy with a broad grin and his hair slicked so that it's parted to the side, further intrudes on Izuku's personal space before shouting, "Well, if it isn't another pompous member of 1A. I sure do hope your personality isn't as explosive as the last fill-in." Izuku blinks, his mind registering that the boy is talking about Katsuki. Within that split-second span of time it takes for his eyes to reopen, there are suddenly more members of 1B filing in behind the blonde. One of which is a girl with her orange hair tied into a ponytail. She has noticeably massive hands that she uses to karate chop the blonde into submission. Izuku winces, feeling a phantom pain in his neck just from witnessing the move. "Sorry about Monoma," she shares a matching expression to Izuku's, though hers is likely more from second-hand embarrassment because of her classmate. When her hands shrink to an average size so that she can hold one out for a handshake, the girl introduces herself, "I'm Itsuka Kendo. It'll be a pleasure having you join our class for the day." Kendo pauses before adding, "Though I do hope you've got more of a filter than our last guest." At that, Izuku can't help but chuckle. Katsuki certainly made an impression on the class. Then again, he makes his personality one that's hard to forget. Kabakugo is a rare breed from me and the rest of my class, so don't worry about that. Though Izuku absent-mindedly fiddles with the paperweight in his blazer pocket when he recalls Mineta's unfiltered version of profanity. He ceases his anxiety when he remembers the small pervert quit the hero course. The girl with green hair darker than Izuku's and pointed teeth like Kirishima's straightens her posture and flashes her fangs with a grin. "Oh, I dunno about that, you two seem to be keeping the stud standards the same." She places a hand on her hip while jutting it out provocatively and flips her hair just as flirtatiously. Izuku curses himself internally when he falls for the teasing, his body betraying him when he flushes red in embarrassment. Kendo gives the girl the same karate chop treatment as the boy named Monoma. "Leave the poor boy alone, Satsuna. Can't you see you're making him uncomfortable?" Shooting Izuku another apologetic expression on behalf of the class. The boy, who matches Kirishima in more ways than one, pushes past the two girls, flashing shark-tipped teeth while thrusting a thumb at himself. Name's Tetsu. His name is just as baffling as the rest of his greeting when he too invades Izuku's personal space to ask, "Is it true that your quirk gives you chainsaws on your arms?" Izuku shrinks in on himself, giving a meek nod as he braces for what he momentarily forgot about. The initial welcome of the class had lowered his guard, and now he has to prepare to pay the price. That's so metal. He isn't expecting the enthusiastic clash of Tetsu's own fists turn to steel. Izuku blanches, further surprised by the similarities between Kirishima and Tetsu. Still shaken, his body literally trembling, Izuku has to clasp each of his hands together to keep them from quivering. He wrings them together as though he's trying to bleed out his anxiety until he's able to force himself to make eye contact. "You're not freaked out?" Izuku can't help but shift his gaze to glance at the 1B girl with vines on her head. "Well." His eyes are drawn in the direction of a boy whose pale skin pigmentation, coupled with his unique facial features, makes him appear as though his head is a skull. "Shiozaki described your quirk in a pretty." The boy pauses as he mulls over the right terminology to continue with, colorful way but. "Midoriya." Shiozaki's interjection makes Izuku jump in place, but he recovers quickly. He faces the girl as she approaches him, mustering up as much fake confidence as he can. "Yes, Shiozaki." Izuku forces his mouth to form some semblance of a smile and tries to keep his wobbly tone as polite as possible. His fabricated facial expression falls flat when Shiozaki surprises him by bending down at the waist. "I would like to apologize for the way I treated you because of your quirk." She starts with a sincere statement before placing her hands over her heart and raising her head ever so slightly to look up at Izuku. My behavior was unacceptable, and I'm ashamed that it took my return to my class to remember we are all the Lord's children. Izuku tries not to gawk too much when she lowers her head again and repeats herself, please forgive me. He notices across the room a few hero students with mutation quirks who watch the entire interaction with keen interest. He wonders if they had a frank discussion with her to lead to this change of opinion. Of course I forgive you, Shiozaki. Izuku accepts her apology regardless. He gives her a smile, a genuine one this time, to show he doesn't hold a grudge. It's okay, really, lots of people react that way. Actually, I think you took it better than most people do. He even goes as far as trying to make her feel better by comparing previous ridicules. However, when he sees everyone staring at him with wide eyes, he realizes that his comment had the opposite effect. He forces a chuckle that only sounds awkward while trying to smooth over his mistake, and nothing I haven't heard before. I mean, I heard worse. Dude. That is not okay. Tetsu shakes his head while giving Izuku a look of pity. Even the blonde boy named Monoma shares a similar look from his spot on the floor upon recovery. Midoriya. I must apologize again. Shiozaki bows a second time. I didn't realize you had received such harsh mistreatment prior to my own, only further worsening my scrutiny. But Izuku frantically waves his hands in a gesture for her to stop. No. Really. It's fine. Water under the bridge. Seeing the tail end of that interaction, Monoma forces himself up from one knee and begins brushing himself off. Good. I'm glad that's behind us. Though he has to duck down to avoid a repeat of his collapse from a kendo karate chop, because we have much more pressing matters. Here he goes again. A boy with a headband keeping his hair pointed up rolls his eyes at his classmates' antics. We made a pact with the other courses to see what we're dealing with. We can't back out now. Monoma tries and fails to keep the whine out of his voice while desperately attempting to convince his class to play along. What are you talking about? And Izuku can't help but raise a brow upon having his own interest piqued. Kendo releases a deep-rooted sigh before explaining, with the sports festival approaching, a bunch of people thought it'd be a good idea to visit 1A's homeroom to see what all the fuss was about. After the USJ, she frowns and threatens Monoma with a raised hand once she finishes with Izuku, which we are not doing. She stops when Tetsu feigns a cough into his own hand. That same hand reaches around his head to scratch at his nape while he awkwardly explains why he's siding with Monoma. Actually, I do kinda wanna see what the competition is like. Monoma's face flashes with relief before settling into a grin. See, that's one in favor. Everyone else. A few mumbles increase before becoming a chorus of commotion, almost indistinguishable and unintelligible, but they all seem to be a form of agreement at the very least. Fine. Fine. Kendo eventually caves and accepts the majority opinion of the class. But everyone be on their best behavior. Not without shouting at them as they funnel into the hallway though. She turns towards Izuku as they pass by and gives him an apologetic smile. Sorry Midoriya. It's okay. I don't think anyone will mind, he returns the expression before following suit. However, he does try to linger behind to avoid the coming interaction as much as possible. In doing so, he's joined by a blonde with horns protruding from her golden locks. Hi. I'm Pony. Sorry if my Japanese bad. From America, she speaks in a broken dialectic and a strong accent, but Izuku manages to comprehend her words enough. Hello, Pony, it's nice to meet you. He forgets about honorifics and traditional greetings when she holds out her hand to shake, and don't worry, your Japanese is just fine. Oh, good. At that, she clasps her other hand over his while still hanging on. Izuku becomes flustered and looks around when he realizes she has no intention of letting go. I wanted to say I were bullied because my quirk too, but his panic settles when she gestures with the horns atop her head and she says, I understand. He gives her hands a squeeze to show he comprehends her meaning and nods. Sure, thanks. Monoma stops when he notices the two lagging behind and shouts over his shoulder, hey. Don't be getting all cuddly with a member of 1A just because you feel sorry for him. Pony lets Izuku go, and they quicken their pace to catch up as he continues his rant. We're still going to be competing against each other in the festival. Kendo fixes him with a glare to cease the tirade. Leave them alone, Monoma. And the rest of the journey to Class 1A goes relatively smoothly from there. It's a short walk, after all. When they arrive, they discover that the other classes beat them to their destination. It seems Katsuki and a few others are already having a heated encounter with the other courses. Among the sea of students, Izuku spots Gen Ed and business mingling around the support department. At the head of the herd stands a purple-haired boy, his voice tired but still carrying over the crowd. Gotta say, I'm a little disillusioned if this is what you're offering. The sunken eye bags carry a weight like his words as he continues. There's a lot of us who didn't make the hero course and got stuck in general studies or other departments. However, depending on the results of the sports festival, did you know we could get transferred classes? It's my understanding a student dropped out and left a spot available in your class. Consider this a declaration of war to claim that open position. The student's in his way part for him to pass through until he reaches Izuku. He's taller, eyes aimed downwards like Izuku is a pebble in his path. It's a stare that Izuku is familiar with. The boy shoulder decks Izuku and carries on after their brief moment of locking eyes. But Izuku turns and watches the boy leave even after that. If this whole controversy taught him anything, it's that he'll have to earn his place in the hero course. Chapter 23. Boiling blood sloshes to the surface, burning, but not quite as bad as the aching pain in his stomach. A harsh pounding contracts his heartbeat with his body, that same strong slam in his head. Izuku can't resist the intense force anymore, he can't remain upright, he lands on all fours. The boy reaches up to cover his mouth just as fast, squeezing his eyes shut as he gags on the pain. Even crouched over a toilet, with a sturdy structure to keep himself braced, he sways side to side. Izuku's eyes shoot open, and he pulls his hand back just in time as he vomits. Puke-excelling stomach acid is streaked through with a darker shade of crimson. He coughs, sputtering, and wipes his mouth on the back of his hand. An aftershock, a dry heave, leaves a thin line of sticky blood dripping from his mouth to the ground. Izuku has to spit to get the metallic taste out of his mouth. Every day as the sports festival drew nearer, Izuku's bloody coughs became increasingly more violent as they have become more frequent. If it weren't for the hereditary condition of his mother, it could have been dismissed as a nervous sickness. Minus the copious amount of blood that comes with those fits of regurgitation. Nevertheless, he passed it off as such to his mom and teachers, as an excuse to rough it out in the restroom. The bathroom stall becomes claustrophobic when he thinks about one of them walking in and discovering the truth. The effectiveness of that feeling increases when he hears the squeak of the restroom door as an indication of somebody entering. Which, of course, is soon followed by the slaps of shoes against bathroom tile. Izuku stiffens, his body tensing to the point that he can feel his own pulse palpitating. It doesn't help that he begins to hold his breath when the footsteps draw closer to his stall. When the feet stop right outside his door, he can see the blue sweatpants and matching uniform sneakers that belong to UA's gym outfits. A ragged exhale gives away his position, but he doesn't quite care if it's just a member of his class that he's in the presence of. Before he can wonder which of his peers shares his company, the fellow hero student asks with a familiar voice, "Midoriya? Todoroki?" Izuku tilts his head away from the toilet just enough to take another glance behind himself. Through the slither of the door frame, sure enough, he recognizes his classmate's unique split hair pattern. And if Izuku is not mistaken, Todoroki's usually stoic expression appears mildly concerned. "What are you doing here?" Izuku's own face twists and scrunches as he tries to decipher the meaning behind his classmate's presence. Considering Todoroki didn't go into the stall beside him, use a urinal or wash his hands, he can only assume. "I came to check on you." Izuku does a double take when he hears Todoroki audibly confirm his assumption. As though Todoroki can somehow see that reaction despite the barrier between them, the boy awkwardly explains himself, "You've been gone a while, and the festival is about to start soon." Todoroki shifts his weight, feet shuffling ever so slightly in a strange sort of nervous fidget. Even if Izuku closes his eyes not to see, he can still hear the other boy's shoes squeaking. "Izawa-sensei sent you?" Izuku tries to think of the most rational reason as to why Todoroki would bother to care. He keeps his eyes closed, trying to make the dark void of his mind less suffocating than the bathroom stall he's in. There's a delay before Todoroki's response that fools Izuku into thinking the boy left him alone. "No. I was personally concerned." But the eventual reply shocks him enough to make his eyes snap open. Back in the festival stadium's bathroom, his gaze is drawn back in the direction of his competitor for the day. "There was something I wanted to talk to you about before the first tournament." Todoroki's voice draws Izuku's ear next. Izuku pushes himself up before he flushes the toilet. When he opens the stall door, Todoroki seems taken aback to be met face to face. Izuku then inquires, "There is?" Todoroki shifts to be straight now that he's seeing Izuku's face. As he had previously, he takes his time to collect his thoughts and formulate his words properly. You have a powerful quirk, but choose not to use it unless absolutely necessary. There's something in the boy's tone that makes Izuku keen to listen. I can relate. Suddenly, all of their strange encounters prior to now make some sort of sense to Izuku. His eyes widen momentarily when he makes the connection of their quirks, but he quickly recomposes himself to match Todoroki's mellow attitude. You're fire. Right. He treads carefully just in case he made a mistake with his assumption. Todoroki's eyes narrow, a glare directed at nobody in particular shining through his heterochromic gaze. My father's fire, the low growl is also a switch in tone that Izuku isn't expecting. Don't let it be misconstrued, I still have my mother's eyes, and that alone will be enough, which is why I'm stronger than you. There's suddenly a thick tension in the air that wasn't there previously. Izuku doesn't bother hiding his broadened eyes this time. The statement that just came out of Todoroki's mouth was firm enough to sound as though it had come from a senior. Such conviction coming out of nowhere unsettles him. I'm more capable, Todoroki reaffirms his bold proclamation. The hand he uses to create ice forms a fist that appears to be holding determination as he declares, I will beat you. Izuku has to blink back his surprise. Maybe some tears as well. And here he had believed for a second that someone actually cared enough to relate to him and his quirk. He makes a sound. Something along the lines of a scoff. A declaration of war. Izuku shakes his head and sighs, you're not the first. When his initial disappointment dissipates, he forces a smile and looks Todoroki in the eye. I can't pretend I understand completely why you felt the need to single me out in particular, but I think I get it enough. Mimicking Todoroki to an extent, he makes his own fist and slams it against his chest. If you don't need your fire to win, then I don't need my chainsaws. Izuku doubles over, blood spurting out of his mouth as he coughs uncontrollably. The burning sensation in his chest returns, the internal heat spreading towards his stomach. He had thought he got that out of his system. Apparently he thought wrong. Todoroki takes a tentative step forwards, his hands at his sides twitching. Are you okay? He lingers while trying to figure out what to do. When Izuku glances up at him, Todoroki actually appears concerned as he had earlier. I'm fine, Izuku waves a dismissive hand for Todoroki to step aside before using the back of that hand to wipe his mouth. He staggers to the sink before running cold water. After Izuku splashes some on his face to cool off, he looks over his shoulder at his loitering classmate and says, I'll be out in a minute, and then adds a little quieter, thanks for checking on me. Todoroki opens his mouth, closes it, and then reopens to reply, if you say so. Izuku waits until after Todoroki has left to turn off the faucet and pull some paper towels to dry off. He waits roughly another minute after that, counting the seconds down in his head, to pull out his cell phone and call his mom. The dial tone makes him worry that he waited too long to do so until the line clicks over when she answers. Izuku. I thought you would be starting by now. Not that I'm complaining to be hearing from you, her voice sounds chipper and energetic enough that nobody would ever guess her bloody coughs had intensified as well. I told you that I would call before any matches began. He tries to match her upbeat mood as best as he can. He's well aware by now that she's probably acting just as much as he is not to worry him, but if she can see through his facade the same as he can hers, neither of them pointed out to the other. Do you think you'll be able to watch the first half of the festival, at least? Of course, I wouldn't miss it for the world, especially with my baby boy competing. Inko doesn't hesitate or pause like Todoroki had. Not in the slightest does she waver or ponder her answer. Izuku whines and blushes from embarrassment, but can't resist a goofy smile. The burning sensation that had been in his chest becomes a soothing warmth to his heart. The room I'm in comes with a television, so don't worry, I won't miss a thing. Izuku's smile fades at the reminder that his mom is currently in a hospital bed. Despite his mother's high spirits, he knows that a reason for being there is serious. Did the doctors tell you anything new yet? The hold on his phone tightens as he presses it closer to his ear. Unlike his coughing fits, his mother had hers far longer. A cause for concern became much more pressing as of late. I'm afraid not, Inko's answer lowers Izuku's spirits even further. They took their tests, and the surgery is still scheduled for tonight though. He nods. Okay, well remember to text me if you learn anything new. I can still look at my phone in between matches and stuff. Izuku tries to maintain an encouraging tone, but catches a glimpse of his downtrodden demeanor in the reflection of the bathroom mirror. I know, sweetheart, I won't forget. Inko's consoling response tells him that she can somehow see the same thing without even being there. A brief beat passes before she tries cheering him up. Oh, but enough about me, you have to worry about winning too. Her change in attitude is enough to get a small smile out of her son. Oh, I dunno, it's a tough competition. Izuku chuckles at the thought of competing against Katsuki without his quirk. Not to mention Todoroki's challenge, and the boy from Gen Ed whose quirk is a mystery to him. And you've got a tough quirk just like the rest. Inko's retort surprises her son so much that he nearly loses his grip on his phone. He manages to catch it and hold it back up to his ear, his mother listening to the fumbling all the while. If my class wasn't ready to see it yet, I don't think the world is ready yet either. He can feel the heat increasing in his chest again and clutches the spot where it burns most. Pichita's tail rests in his palm through the fabric of his PE jacket. There are plenty of heroes who get critiqued because of their appearance, like Gang Orca. Don't let it limit your potential. Izuku listens to his mom's voice over the line and can't come up with any retort to her logic. He can almost hear the smug smile in her tone. Izuku lowers his hand to look at it. My potential, huh? Todoroki had said something similar. He wonders if his ability truly is ripe for the taking. When he coughs and a splatter of blood specks land on his open hand, he stops thinking about it in favor of wiping the mess off on his pants leg. Was that a cough? I told you to get checked with me while I'm here. Izuku can hear his mom's concern loud and clear through the phone. He has to hold it a relative distance away. I'm fine, Mom, just clearing my throat. He feigns another cough in an effort to sound convincing before scrambling for a way to hang up. I have to go now anyways, we're about to start. That seems to do the trick well enough. Inko's startled response forgetting his cough. Oh, okay. Good luck. Love you. She returns to her bright and bubbly attitude. Love you too, Izuku speaks with a smile in his own tone before hanging up. Then, he enters the fray of the sports festival. Chapter 24. Street-stained red are paths walked only by the dead. Blood as dark as the asphalt seeps through his gaping wounds. The crimson liquid runs down his arms as fast as his legs run down the road. He moves in and out of pools of light created by street lamps, the rising sun's slight glimmer making him scared of being left in the dark, but also terrified of being seen by what's chasing him if he goes into the light. His arms are wrapped around his guts like he's holding them in. He's so beat, he very well could be. His steel-plated feet scrape the pavement before catching the curb of a sidewalk. He flies forward, going airborne. Then, he lands face first in a bloody heap. It's not the first time that he's fallen. However, it is the first time that he's been unable to get back up. All his body covered in purple welts can manage is a jerky movement that gets him to roll over onto his back. No pale moonlight, not a single star in the sky, offers a glimmer of hope. Just a bare blue like his hair matches his face now. He stares up but closes his eyes. The pitch-black void that dares him to blink forces his eyes to reopen and strain to see through cracked bifocals. The darkness tells him to give in to temptation. To just close his eyes. His eyelids are so heavy and the dawn so dark that he mistakenly believes that he does, just for a fleeting second. Trembling fingers reach into his left pants pocket, straining to grab his cell phone. Blood dots the screen when he does manage to pull it out. He doesn't bother trying to wipe it clean with his sleeve, considering that's just as blood-soaked. Instead, he taps and scrolls through his very few contacts, trying to find the one person he wishes to talk to in the end. He accepts his fate and prepares to say goodbye. He suddenly realizes how eerily quiet the still and seemingly empty street is. The only sound to be heard is the rings his phone makes as he waits for who he's calling to answer. Each ring is so drawn out, it almost matches his long intakes of air. The wait is excruciating. He no longer feels like he's waiting for somebody to answer his call. He starts to feel like the only one who he's waiting for anymore is death incarnate. When the line clicks instead of beeping and going to voicemail, his breath catches in his throat. He tries to choke back a sob of relief when he hears a familiar voice answer, "Hello?" Steeling himself, sniffling only a little as he holds back his tears, he presses the phone closer to his face. "Hi Tenya." The 30-year-old man's voice wobbles just as much as his hand holding the weight of his phone. "It's me. Your big bro. Densei." The very concerned younger sibling fumbles with his own phone when he recognizes his brother's voice. Once the rustling ceases, he asks, "Are you alright?" The wounded man smiles to himself, a soft weak one that's much too small to be seen by anyone in the dim morning. Yeah. He's so happy just to hear his brother's affectionate tone one final time that he doesn't consider the answer a lie. The pressure on his sides becomes too much for him to handle, forcing out a horrendous cough. Spittle dribbles down Tensei's chin, but he's unable to lift his other arm in order to wipe it away. As much pain as he's in, he's just relieved to have this one last conversation with his little brother. Yeah, Tenya, I'm fine. He doesn't want Tenya to worry about that nasty cough though. You sound terrible. But Tenya won't let him off the hook that easily. The Ingenium family had always been an overprotective bunch. If only his brother could see him now, he'd throw a fit. Fortunately, Tenya mistakes his cough for anything other than a beating. Are you coming down with something? No. Is Tensei's immediate response. After all, he truly isn't sick. But then he reconsiders the alternative of telling his brother the truth, I mean. Maybe. He nibbles his bottom lip, trying to decide what it is he should say. He doesn't want to lie, but he doesn't want Tenya to worry either. He just wants to hear his brother's voice one last time. I dunno. I'm just tired. That's all. He settles on letting Tenya know that much, at the very least. He is tired. And then he tries changing the subject to divert Tenya's attention from fretting over his well-being. I wanted to see how you were. What with the big sports festival coming up and all. Tenya hums from the other end of the line, wanting to ask more about Tensei's health. After careful consideration, he decides to spare his older sibling the interrogation and settles on praise instead. You're so kind. Always looking out for everybody else. Even when you yourself aren't feeling well. That's my heroic brother. Tenya's tender tone is full of pride when it comes to the brother that he's always idolized. He switches to something a little sterner for the last part though. You'd better remember to get some rest though. Don't overdo it. Tensei has to force himself not to laugh at Tenya's antics. He's pretty sure his body wouldn't be able to handle it. Right. He trails off as his smile diminishes. The tears that he's been fighting to hold back begin seeping out of his eyes from the edges. Listen, Tenya. His voice is just as watery that he has to pause before trying again. Tenya. Tenya picks up on the way that his brother sounds. So fragile. So already broken. Tensei. He asks for him out of the fear that he may not be there to answer anymore. Tensei's tears spill out from the corners of his eyes, blending with the blood that's already on his cheeks. You know I love you. Right. He feels more pain in his heart than his body when he realizes there's no way to express the amount of love he has for his brother. I get busy sometimes and forget to say it, but I never forget to think it. Even with everything else running through my head, you're always there too. I need you to know that. Tenya had always looked up to Tensei as the hero Ingenium. Always business as a priority, the well-being of the community. Sometimes, Tensei forgot to be there as an older brother, he worries. In his final moments, he realizes he wasn't able to save his family or himself because of his priorities. Tensei. Tenya raises his voice as high as the level of concern for his brother. He's not sure what's brought on this emotional speech or why he and Tensei are crying so much right now, but it doesn't feel like a very good reason. His lips quiver as he tries to formulate the proper words to respond to him with, I. But he never gets the chance to say them. Tensei sees something that Tenya does not. So he cuts his brother off to say first, I have to go now, hesitation making him stutter only momentarily. Tensei, wait, his little brother makes it harder for him to hang up. There's a desperation in Tenya's tone that pleads for him not to go. But he can't let Tenya hear what's about to happen. Take care of yourself, Tenya, he ends the call so that he won't have to. Then, it's just him and the one who had been chasing him. Tensei drops his phone, the screen cracking on impact with the pavement as it bounces twice. He figures he won't need it anymore anyway. The hero's metallic heels slide on the concrete, feet pressing in and grinding into the ground. His legs wobble, thin things ready to snap at the bone. However, with the help of his hands, he's able to force himself to stand. Beneath him is a puddle of blood, marking the place of his final stand. Ingenium will run from this fight no longer. Tensei pants heavily, body hunching over more than the man who is currently looming over him. He raises his arms, fingers curling to make his hands into clenched fists. The last time he took on a defensive stance like this, it hadn't been as pathetic. Even so, even if he gets beaten down like he did back then, he'll fight to the bitter end. Just so you know. He addresses the slender silhouette that's finally caught up to him with as much feigned bravado as he can muster, I won't go down easy. Tattered cloth hangs from the frightening figure, part of it billowing in the wind like a blood-red scarf. In the man's hand is a sword as slender as he, the blade stained with ichor. Towering over Ingenium, the being creates a grim reaper visage, the katana substituting for a scythe. Without a nose, his face could easily be mistaken for a skull. Tensei glares at the man who had been chasing him with defiance. His shaking fists hold still. He finds his resolve and faces death head-on. Death stares back, impressed with the hero's conviction, and responds with a toothy grin that stretches ear to ear. Chapter 25. Strips of cloud streak through the sky, tinted orange by the rising sun that seeps through them. Beneath, there's a blue backwash. That clear color becomes quickly consumed by a shadowy silhouette. It takes Izuku squinting his eyes to recognize the figure as his classmate, Kyokajiru. She's reaching down to him with an outstretched hand. Izuku realizes he's gazing upwards, laying flat on his back in the grassy field of the sports festival stadium. How he landed there, sprawled out, eludes him only for a second longer. Then he remembers. The cavalry battle and the obstacle race before it. He reaches for his forehead first, fingers searching for the million-point headband he was wearing. The first event had been a race track with various obstacles on the course. He managed to get first place using a piece of scrap metal to surf on landmines, a stroke of luck. That luck, however, must have been used all at once. The second event made his placement backfire when points provided for the cavalry battle were determined by the race ranking, and he became a target for everyone. He kept his promise to himself and Todoroki. He hadn't used his quirk. Even if he could have warded the other teams off from stealing his headband by having a chainsaw protruding from his head, he played without transforming. Whether that was the right choice or not remains to be seen. Izuku feels the curls of his hair and then fabric. He releases a sigh of relief. Kyoka takes his hand and helps him to his feet. It's hard to get his footing firm at first, but Izuku manages. "You alright?" Kyoka expresses her concern while gauging his own expression. "You didn't hit your head, did you?" When Izuku levels out and sees Kyoka more clearly, he smiles to give her a bit of assurance. "I'm okay so long as you're here." He's immensely grateful that she was one of the few willing to join his team for the cavalry battle. Kyoka crosses her arms and looks away to hide the blush that creeps up to her face. "Yeah. You definitely hit your head." She mumbles and grumbles despite the smile that pulls at her mouth. When the stadium speakers chime to life so that President Mick can announce, "The results of the cavalry battle are up, folks." Izuku returns his attention upward. Kyoka looks with him. Posted on an electronic billboard, the top 5 teams of the event are listed. "Great job to everybody, but the qualifying groups will be the only ones who proceed to our third and final event, so read 'em well." Izuku is pleased to see he made it to the final round with the rest of his team. Along with Todoroki's team and several others. Amongst the qualifiers is Iida, but the boy seems too engrossed in his phone to care. As a matter of fact, Izuku would say Iida had been distracted since even before the first event began. Though he chooses to brush it off since it obviously hasn't affected Iida's performance overall. Midoriya. Izuku's attention switches from eyeing Iida to Todoroki, who apparently closed the distance between them while he was deep in thought. "Can we speak privately for a moment?" Izuku glances over at Kyoka to find her staring back. The two of them share a look before he returns his gaze to Todoroki. After a second of hesitation, Izuku nods. "Sure." He then follows the other boy into one of the more vacant hallways of the sports stadium. With the second event over and everyone clearing the field to prepare for the final round, the two have a window of opportunity to talk. Todoroki seizes that chance with vigor, his left hand clenching to make a tight fist. "You almost made me break my vow." Izuku realizes that's the hand that can create fire and recalls the flames that sparked when he tried stealing Todoroki's headband during the cavalry battle. Izuku's own hand hovers over his chest, directly placing itself on the pulley string that dangles beneath his jacket. He admits, "And you almost made me break mine," the thought he had during the cavalry battle to gain an advantage recurring to him. Todoroki's heterochromic eyes widen, surprised by the mutual statement, then blink back to a narrowed focus. "I'm not just saying that to make you feel better either. We truly pushed one another to our limits." Izuku returns the stare with his own tapered look. They maintain eye contact for a while, neither backing down. Not until Todoroki closes his and leans his head back with a resigned sigh, the back of his skull resting against the wall behind him. "Do you know what a quirk marriage is?" He then presses the rest of his body back as though he's sinking into a cushion, but shows no signs of being comfortable. Izuku blinks back his initial shock, taken aback by the question. Suddenly, it clicks in his head why Todoroki wouldn't want to use his fire. Though Todoroki goes on to say more and explain it to him anyways, they began during the second generation after quirks first appeared. Strong individuals would choose a partner and force them into marriage for the sole purpose of passing on a strengthened combination version of their quirks. With his wealth and fame, my father made my mother's family agree to a marriage much like that. All to get his hands on her quirk and have me. Izuku swallows any empty words of consolation he may have. After all, Todoroki isn't finished. In short. That's why I'll never use my father's rotten quirk. If I can win this festival without using it, I'll have denied him everything. Todoroki pushes himself off the wall and reopens his eyes. I wanted to tell you this, so you understand why I won't make the same mistake again in the final round. Sorry if I wasted your time. You didn't waste my time. Izuku shakes his head before steeling himself, but you will be if you continue to think like that. Todoroki makes an expression just short of a sneer, fixing Izuku with a glare. What do you mean by that? He snarls. I mean, my quirk was literally given to me. Yours wasn't. Yours is your own, neither your mom or dad's. Izuku flinches but doesn't back down. Not even when Todoroki growls like Katsuki would when angry. I shouldn't have expected you to understand. Todoroki pivots on his heel with a sharp scrape of his sneaker, before storming off at a brisk pace. Izuku reaches out, even contemplating chasing the boy to prove that they are alike as kindred spirits, but he stays rooted in place until Todoroki is gone instead. Izuku sighs in defeat before heading to the bleachers himself. There, he finds the rest of his class waiting for the next event to be announced. A few wave to him and he waves back. Ultimately, he sits next to Kyoka. Hey, you. Where have you been? She asks. Having a fun discussion about quirks with Todoroki, Izuku can't help the dry sarcasm that leaks into his tone. When he sees the concerned expression on Kyoka's face, he quickly tries to assure her, not so much about mine. It was more so about his. Though that doesn't do much to soothe her creased facial features. Do you want to talk about yours? She cautiously uses a gentle voice that matches her eyes when Izuku looks into them. When she hears his heartbeat quicken its pace, she reels back. Why, you don't have to if you don't want to. Izuku shakes his head and reaches out to stop her from waving her hands. No. It's okay. I just usually don't get a lot of people interested in it. Without realizing, he winds up holding both of them even after she settles down. The two of them blush and look away from one another. What did you want to know about it? Kyoka's voice squeaks as she shyly tries to muster enough courage to ask, does it hurt when you transform? The pained expression crosses Izuku's face when he meets her eyes again. He can't lie to her, but he can't bring himself to look away either. There's a burst of warmth in his chest as he says, every time. The two jump in their seats and separate from each other when Present Mic's voice screeches over the stadium speakers. Each of them blush a shade of red brighter than Kirishima's hair when the rest of the class looks back at them. On now announcing the final event. What else would it be other than good old-fashioned 1v1s? They're fortunately saved from further embarrassment by the burst of excitement Mic's announcement casts over the crowded stadium though. A chorus of cheers that's accompanied by cacophonous applause drowns out Ishido's attempt at teasing them. Let's start announcing the matchups. Mick keeps the hype going a while longer before an abrupt muffling of his microphone, which is then followed by, hold up. This just in. I've just been informed that two of the qualifiers for the final event have opted out, and adjustments are being made to replace them with the two ranked right behind them from the last event. The crowd's collective reaction shifts to confused murmurs, Izuku and his classmates amongst them. Izuku and his peers further respond with awe when they discover it's some of their own who are opting out. Ejiro holds his own tail in his hands as he explains himself, the cavalry battle. I have no recollection of anything that happened. Not until the end. His head nods in the direction of the Gen Ed students, but Izuku knows exactly which of them Ejiro is gesturing towards. I think it was that guy's quirk. The purple-haired boy across the way scoffs. Everyone made it here by their own strength except for me. I don't know how I got here or why. Hey. I was on that guy's team too. By that logic, I shouldn't be competing either. Ishido pouts with her pink lips and folds her arms. That's not what I'm saying. Ejiro rushes to explain himself better, I'm talking about my pride here. I just don't think it's right. I guess that makes sense. Hanta scratches the back of his head as he tries to boggle his brain around Ejiro's decision. But then why did Iida drop out? He gives up on trying to understand after a while and looks for the other boy instead. The rest of the class looks around too, realizing Iida isn't with them. Izuku begins to worry just as much as he wonders about Iida checking his phone constantly. Though he doesn't get very long to dwell on it, not when Present Mic shouts over his thoughts. Okay. After some re-evaluation, we got our first round of matchups. Starting with. Izuku looks upwards, seeing the electronic billboard displaying what the first match will be. Izuku Midoriya. Himself. Versus. A picture to go along with the name, Hitachi Shinso. Has Izuku recognizing the Gen Ed student as his opponent. Midoriya. Izuku jumps a little when he hears his name being called. He turns to see Ejiro fixing him with a serious look. That guy. Whatever you do. Don't answer him. Izuku isn't sure how to respond at first, so he numbly nods. Then, thanks for the advice. He stands up from his seat to head down to the field for his fight. Good luck, Kyoka gives him an encouraging smile to which he returns. Show him how manly you are, bro. Kirishima flashes a thumbs up that Izuku also mirrors. And he's standing across from Shinso before he knows it. He wasn't expecting to be the first match of the final event, a nervous cough coming up on him, but he finds the resolve needed to fight. The crowd roars around him with a frenzy of flashing lights. This is no place or time to show weakness. Izuku swallows the blood that tries climbing up his throat and seals his mouth shut. Yet to show his teeth yet, if you know what I mean, we've got Izuku Midoriya of Class A. Present Mick announces his presence to the world first. Izuku tries to fix his posture, standing up straight, trying to be as tall and proud as he can. Versus. A beat of silence. Sorry, but he's not done much to stand out yet either, Hitachi Shinso of General Studies. Shinso sneers. Without further dallying, let's get right into the battle. Ready. Izuku tenses. Shinso stays slack. Start. Mick signals the start of the match. Before Izuku dashes, Shinso starts to say something, making the boy pause. It must be pretty nice having a quirk that gets you in the top heroics class, they each lock eyes, and not a villain's quirk that gets ridiculed like mine. Izuku stops in his tracks. Shinso smirks, sensing that he struck some sort of nerve. I mean. You haven't even used your blessed ability yet. I, on the other hand, I'm forced to be judged under a spotlight. He gains enough confidence when he sees the way Izuku expressively reacts to his taunting that he even takes a step forward. You must have had everything handed to you that you never stop to think what it means to actually earn something. That's the last chord that needs to be struck for Izuku to respond. Unable to resist or restrain himself, he shouts angrily, you don't know. It feels like a bucket of ice-cold water has just been dropped over him. The fire in his eyes gets snuffed out, glazing over. The tensing of his muscles become even tighter, confining him, holding him in place. Shinso's quirk takes control. Damn it, Midoriya. I warned you. Ejiro slaps a hand against his face when he recognizes the effect of Shinso's quirk overtaking Izuku. Shinso's smirk stretches, his lips parting to make a grin. I win, he chuckles to himself. Boy. Boy. Hey. Hey. What's going on? This battle is just beginning. Show us some spirit. Present Mick's voice shouts from the stadium speakers, but sounds ever so distant to Izuku's ears, mere seconds into the match, and Midoriya is frozen in place, there's something muffling the boy's hearing. Almost as though he's completely underwater now. Though he does register the words enough to understand his situation is a dire one, he's not even twitching. Could this be Shinso's quirk? Suddenly, his ears clear enough that he can hear Shinso say, turn around and walk out of the ring. The order resonates strongly in him. His body jolts, acting of its own accord. Izuku watches himself shift and turn to obey, much to his horror and awe. Whoa. Midoriya is following orders like a good little boy. Present Mick reacts for the audience to Shinso's brainwashing effect, but Izuku's hearing is back to being muffled. Gradually, Izuku sways side to side with each exaggerated stomp towards the brink of the ring. No matter the amount of willpower he tries to use to stop himself, he keeps going. All he can do is helplessly watch. He looks at the dark hallway waiting for him. There's nobody there waiting to console him. Not his mom. Not Kyoka or any of his friends. Just an empty corridor. The high-pitched yap breaks through the muffling effect on his ears. Izuku's heart thumps in his chest. He recognizes that bark. He hears it a second time, this time much louder. Much closer. Izuku's eyes regain some of their color when he sees a familiar sight. Emerging from the hallway ahead of him, trotting on all fours, is none other than Pochita. The small dog walks right up to him, by the edge of the ring. Pochita's tail flicks back and forth, wagging. If his eyes weren't so dry, Izuku would be shedding tears. He continues to fight Shinso's hold on him, but all he can do is look down at his old friend. Just like Pochita had done when saving him, Pochita begins to speak. Izuku, I thought you were going to show me your dream. The little dog tilts its head to the side, as though the chainsaw protruding from it is too heavy. That's why I passed my power to you. Izuku strains to speak, wanting to respond. He has so much he wants to say. That he doesn't deserve the quirk Pochita entrusted to him. It shouldn't belong to him. Izuku wants to shout that the power belonging to Pochita should only be used to bring about Pochita's dream and not his own. Somehow, Pochita seems to smile, his eyes creasing with the odd expression. It's as though Pochita could understand every single one of those thoughts as he says, I belong to you. We made a contract, remember? You saved me and earned my power. Pochita begins to trot forward again, gaining traction and speed. Izuku. My dream. Pochita hops, clearing the gap between boy and dog. You already fulfilled it. Pochita leaps right into Izuku's chest to be caught in his arms. My dream was only ever to have someone hug me. Izuku's arms cross over himself as he regains awareness of his surroundings, and his hearing returns to him. The numb effect is gone, and yet he feels the loss of Pochita cradled against him immediately. The dog's tail dangles from his sternum beneath his jacket. He feels tears brimming his eyes. Midoriya. He appears to be back in control. Present Mick notices the change in Izuku's demeanor just in the nick of time. Izuku breathes heavily as he continues holding himself, Pochita's words resonating in his heart quite literally. How? You shouldn't have control. What did you do? Shinso takes a step back as panic settles into his system. There's a shift in the whole atmosphere that makes him sweat. Izuku slowly turns himself around to face his opponent. All of the ill effects recede and he feels rejuvenated. Shinso's quirk was the cold bath that he needed to cleanse his disease. The hot feeling in his chest. The bile in his throat. It's all gone. He feels like an engine being revved to life. Seeing Pochita again, to gain some much needed clarity, that wouldn't have been possible without Shinso's quirk. Izuku smiles and doesn't bother wiping away the tears streaming down his cheeks as he says, thank you. Already flabbergasted, Shinso is struck by a second shock when Izuku wraps his arms around him. The boys suffer a wave of whiplash as Izuku's hug tackle carries them towards the other side of the ring. One goes out of bounds. And the other, in a shocking turn of events, goes on to live their dream. Izuku Midoriya wins. Chapter 26. Izuku's intakes of breath are more elongated than the ringback tone of his cell phone, but nevertheless, the time that he waits for his mother to answer his call feels longer than it takes for his body to regulate the adrenaline still coursing through his system. Immediately after his match with Shinso concluded, he just had to call her. He was fishing his phone out of his pocket as soon as he exited the field. He couldn't wait to share his good news with her. He figures she needs some good news right about now. He's starting to regain control of his breathing while he waits, though he contemplates holding it in on the fifth ring. Relieved, Izuku straightens up when he hears the line click over. His mother's voice follows, hello. He's just as quick to match her tone with equal elation, hey mom. You have reached Izuku Midoriya. I'm unable to answer the phone right now, but you can leave a message and I'll give you a call back, but that excitement evaporates when he realizes that he's only hearing his mother's voicemail. Izuku's smile wavers and shrinks, but doesn't disappear completely. He pushes the phone closer so that she'll be able to hear him and leaves her a message, since he'll likely be too preoccupied with his next match for her to call him back. Hi mom. I just finished my first match. Guess what? I won. He pauses to let that sink in a bit before continuing, and that's not all. I don't know how, but I saw Pochita again, mom. He has to close his eyes when he feels them beginning to water. The image of Pochita returning to him during his match against Shinso replays in his mind. You were right, Pochita gave me his quirk so that I could make it my own and become a hero. Izuku swallows some of his saliva when he realizes there's no scratchiness to his throat, and you know something else. I haven't been coughing ever since. As a matter of fact, I feel a lot better. He slowly realizes the connection between accepting his quirk and his disease ceasing. I think I was holding myself back in more ways than one. I guess Pochita really did save my life. The mental block now cleared. He only wishes it were that easy for his mother, but he's too transfixed on his own condition being cured that he doesn't dwell on hers. His hand places itself over his heart, rubbing the area as though he's petting Pochita. His focus flicks to the hallway behind him when he hears footsteps drawing near. His eyes meet tired ones resting on dozens of drooping bags. Shinso gives a lazy and awkward wave before shoving that hand into his pants pocket like the other. Izuku returns the gesture with his free hand and a smile. I gotta go now, but we'll talk more later. He quickly wraps up his message before adding as an afterthought, love you. Shinso nods towards Izuku's phone as the boy hangs up, girlfriend. Izuku blushes and quickly shakes his head, my mom. Ah, Shinso nods in response, but his voice is distant and his eyes wander. She was excited you won. Izuku refrains from wincing, understanding that the topic of their match must be a sore spot for Shinso, even if it's a part of making small talk. She didn't answer. but I'm sure she will be when she hears." He winds up scratching the bush atop his head that he calls hair to keep his hands occupied. When that action goes on for too long, he matches Shinso and shoves them into his pockets. "That's good." Shinso mumbles just loud enough to be heard before sighing and raising his voice. "I came to find you because you seemed a bit shaken up though. And I was wondering. Why did you thank me?" Izuku's eyes widen when he remembers that he did thank Shinso. That must have been weird to the Gen Ed student without context. It'd probably be weird even with context if Izuku explained his deceased dog returned to him in a vision. So Izuku keeps it simple. "Those things that you said to me. They made me realize I was acting wrong about my quirk. You were right that I was ungrateful and should have been using it when everyone else in this competition is using theirs to give it their all." It's Shinso's eyes that widen now. Though his shock is much more subdued, the subtle lift of his brows conveying a lot, but also very little at the same time. "Listen. What I said out there, that was just to get a rise out of you so I could use my quirk." He scratches at his own mess of hair while trying to apologize, but Izuku waves for him to stop. "Like I said, it was thanks to you and your quirk that I was able to better appreciate my quirk." Izuku pauses before shifting his footing and raising his chin. "You know though. You should consider what you said for yourself too." Shinso starts to frown, head tilting to the side as he gradually does. "What's that supposed to mean?" His tone sounds just as angry as he looks. Izuku quickly holds up his hands in an attempt to calm the other boy down. "I just meant that I understand where you're coming from, and if I can come to accept my quirk, then you should too." Shinso's frown deepens. "How could you possibly understand where I'm coming from?" His head leans to the other side, as though he's trying to see Izuku from a different perspective. "Were you ridiculed for your quirk like I was all of my life? Were you called a villain because of something you can't control?" Shinso stomps forward in an effort to startle Izuku. "Were you bullied your whole childhood and told you could never be a hero?" But Izuku doesn't flinch. "Yes." Izuku's response startles Shinso instead. "I was." Shinso steps back, almost stumbling over his own footing. "I didn't use my quirk the whole competition because I was too afraid to show it to everyone. I wasn't ready to own up to it and make it my own. But now, I know it's something to be proud of." Izuku reaches out to place his hand on Shinso's shoulder. "Thanks to you." Shinso tries blinking back his shock, but it takes him 2 more blinks after that to do so. Breathlessly, he asks, "What is your quirk?" Izuku smiles but doesn't answer. Instead, he gives Shinso's shoulder a squeeze before letting it go and gestures that there's someone standing behind him. When Shinso turns around, he sees Kyoka approaching from the same hallway that he took. "Sorry if I'm interrupting, but I was hoping to borrow Midoriya for a minute." Kyoka's ear jacks mirrors the gesture of her hand when she comes to a stop. "Ah. This must be the girlfriend then." Shinso smirks when he sees the girl and boy blush profusely, but refrains from teasing or embarrassing them any further. "I guess I'll be going then." He starts to walk away, but Izuku grabs his shoulder again to make him turn back. "Shinso." Izuku looks the other boy in the eyes as he says, "I hope to see you in class," and Shinso has to look away to hide the tears that threaten to spill. "Yeah. See ya." He pulls away to leave and keeps his back turned. That way they can't see that he smiles at the thought of making it into the hero course. Kyoka waits for Shinso to be gone before closing the rest of the distance between herself and Izuku. "I heard you two talking about quirks and got worried, but it seems things aren't so bad between you guys." She raises an inquisitive eyebrow when he looks back. Izuku shrugs, unable to disagree or agree with her because of how hard it is for him to read Shinso. After a second of trying to come up with an answer, he settles on teasing her instead. "Eavesdropping, huh?" He smiles with smug satisfaction when Kyoka's cheeks tint a shade of pink. "You know I can't help but overhear things sometimes." She twirls one of her jacks on her finger while giving him a small pouty puff of her cheeks. "Remind me to keep my thoughts to myself more often." Izuku laughs while watching her playfully huff. "I bet you're the reason why I've gotten over my mumbling habit." "Oh, I'll get you back for this." Kyoka crosses her arms and raises her jacks to appear as intimidating as possible. It works, scaring Izuku enough that he stops his teasing. After he wipes away a sweat drop from his forehead, Izuku scrambles to get himself out of the predicament that he put himself in. "So what else did you overhear?" He winces when he realizes that may not have been the smoothest way to do so. But Kyoka shows him mercy, lowering her ear jacks and arms. "All of the things Shinso said to you on the field. I'm surprised you can forgive him so easily, let alone thank him." She takes a small step closer when Izuku looks away. "You're not mad or anything, are you?" Izuku returns his gaze to the girl in front of him. "How could I be mad? Kyoka's blush from earlier returns and Izuku begins to understand why when he realizes how intimate that seems with their close proximity. Quickly, to defuse the mood, he clears his throat and adds, "I just won my first match and get to continue the festival tournament. I should be happy, right?" Ducking her head down to hide her disappointment that the mood shifted back to normal, Kyoka numbly nods and agrees, "Right. Right." Saving them both from further embarrassment or the situation becoming awkward, Izuku's cell phone begins to vibrate. Though the boy can't feel it in his pocket, the girl can hear it with her quirk. I think someone is calling your phone," she raises her head to inform him. Oh, Izuku shoves his hand into his pocket to find his phone before pulling it out and checking the caller ID. Seeing that it's his mother, he answers, "Hi mom." Except, the person on the other end of the line isn't Izuku Midoriya. Kyoka regrets overhearing a doctor tell Izuku that his mom passed away. The boy pales like he's the one who just died upon hearing the news. The girl isn't in a much better state. Izuku lowers the phone away from his ear, hanging up on the doctor. He tells Kyoka what she already knows, "My mom just died." Not knowing what to say to him in response to that, Kyoka throws herself at the boy and wraps him in a hug. "Oh, Izuku." She holds tightly as he trembles in her arms. She can't hold him up but braces for when his legs give out so that they sink to the floor safely. Izuku's tremors increase when he starts to sob. Slowly, he returns Kyoka's hug, his arms wrapped around her tighter than hers around him. Midoriyas are well renowned for their waterworks. They cry when they are happy. They cry when they are relieved. They cry over any and every small thing. These tears that swell and spill are unlike all those other times. These tears are thicker. These are tears of loss. The warmth of Kyoka's body cradles into Izuku like when he'd hug Pochita. He handles her with care like he would when being safe about Pochita's chainsaw. Their hearts beat in unison with each other as they hold one another close. Their touch is tender and comforting despite the endless supply of tears. Nobody comes through the hall and disturbs them, yet matches continue to transpire. The speaker system echoes updates live as an ambience of the world going on around them while they're stuck in a moment. Time seems to stop, the past inescapable as Izuku dwells on the present. Having just accepted Pochita's heart as his own, he can't help but feel like he left behind his original with his mother's death. When Present Mick announces the next match, he hardly recognizes his own name. He raises his head, sniffling as the tears finally stop streaming down his face. He's being called to the field. His opponent is Todoroki. The matter of quirks and the competition make his heart beat like a war drum. He's no longer zoning out. He's zoned in. Izuku. You shouldn't, he's so zoned in on just Todoroki that he doesn't even register Kyoka, referring to him on a first name basis or her pleas for him not to compete. He stands up, drowning out her voice and focusing on Present Mix calling him to the field. He still has a point to make. After all that's happened. After Pochita and his mom gave their lives for his dream, he has to make it a reality. And he wants to blow off some steam. Izuku steps into the arena with Todoroki. There's something said about the rules of the match like last time, but neither boy pays much attention to the words. Each of them are transfixed on the other, ice-cold glares burning into one another. There's sorrow hidden behind the anger in their eyes, but now is not the time to bottle up such emotions. Now is the time to let loose. Begin. Present Mick calls for the match to start. The trail of ice rapidly snakes across the arena from Todoroki's right foot until it reaches Izuku. A colossal glacier overtakes him instantly, jagged tips spearing holes in the clouds high above. Izuku is encased at the epicenter of the iceberg's bottom, frozen within its base. Wow. And just like that, another round where Todoroki immobilizes his opponent right from the get-go. Present Mick has to do a double take when he realizes this glacier is somehow bigger than the last one that had trapped Zero. When he snaps out of his initial shell-shocked reaction, he prepares to announce Todoroki the victor. Except, I'm not immobilized. Izuku shouts with condensation spraying in the air as much as the spit flying from his mouth does, I can still fight. With that same mouth, he bends his neck down so that he can bite at the zipper of his sports jacket. When he can't reach beyond that, he uses his tongue. The ripcord attached to Izuku's sternum loops at the end, making a tiny handle just big enough for a finger to fit through. Or the tip of a tongue. Izuku's tongue slides through the hole so that he can lift the string and bite down on the rest. He raises his chin, giving the wire a good tug with a yank of his head. That very same skull is carved open by spinning sharpened steel, every metallic tooth hooking itself through flesh until the carotid is torn apart with Izuku's face ripping in two halves. Erupting in synchronization with blood and chainsaws is the throttle trigger, bursting forth a roar of cacophonous clangor. Gnarled crevices with dark walls and verdant plating within those depths cast an arc of crimson liquid through the frozen air, blood being magnified tenfold by the ice surrounding the transformation. Where winding chains work to scrape away the remains of Izuku's face in order to expose the demonic visage beneath, two gas-lit orbs illuminate the revving engine with coruscating golden eyes. Shattering in a shower of flaky particles, the ice breaks around Izuku's body so the bladed bars that saw through his arms can whir with the chain on his head. The elongated fangs protruding from Izuku's metallic jaw glisten under the small snowfall and drip with blood-tainted drool. Todoroki's own jaw hangs open, slack. Tiny clouds of condensation waft from his mouth when his heavy pants match his quickening heartbeat. The turquoise of his left iris fades in synchronization with the brown of his right iris, heterochromic eyes draining of color the longer they go without blinking. Each eye is wide open, expanding larger and larger with every passing second. Izuku's chainsaws continue to roar at a loud decibel despite their idle state. The dizzying spin of the bladed teeth on all three bars protruding from the boy don't distract from his growl though. Stretched and sharpened teeth bear down as blood washes over the metal base of Izuku's skull. Torn tendons drop onto his tattered clothes before sliding off and smacking the concrete floor with a wet squelching slap. The live audience watching the transformation from the stands is too stunned to scream. Kendo covers her mouth to stifle a horrified gasp that chokes itself out of her throat, a few others matching her sentiment are openly gawking. Ibarra ducks her head down and closes her eyes, mouthing Hail Marys and any other prayers she can recite from memory. Oni pales until she feels like she's going to pass out, teary eyes unable to look away from the dramatic display of Izuku's quirk. Tetsu reflexively hardens himself, his survival instinct forcing his body to defend itself by turning to steel. Setsuna nearly loses control of her quirk as well, almost falling apart when her fight-or-flight response makes her want to turn and run. Monoma leans forward, bottom jaw on a hinge, so that it hangs open, his brain unable to process what his eyes are showing him. A strong gust of wind takes the rest of Izuku's shredded jacket off, torn scraps ripping off of his toned arms and muscled torso. Mangled meat finishes falling from him at that same moment, only blood dripping and dotting his chest now. The string attached to his sternum swings side to side as he stretches his spine to raise himself from the ice shell that he just broke out of. The slippery slope makes his sneakers squeak, but he remains standing with firm footing. Ioka can hear her own heart pounding in her chest. She can hear everyone's heart hammering. The stadium's collective beats create a rhythmic drumming that only continues to rise in volume. A tune that keeps climbing makes her fear what the climax will sound like. She tries doing what her mother taught her when it becomes too much. She focuses on just one sound. If she silences all of the surrounding noises and fixates only on a singular source, one not as panicked as the rest, maybe she'll be able to calm herself down. She listens to Izuku's. The blood flow to the organ is rapid. Like gasoline ignited in an engine, it's strong. Yet there's a steady rhythm to it that she can hear as well. Something sad. Like a dog's whimper. Something angry. Almost as though the dog is growling. And something satisfied. Something like a regular heartbeat. Kyoka audibly gasps, unable to throw a hand up to cover her mouth in time. She realizes that Izuku is completely in control of himself right now. He's in his right mind despite the savage snarling state that he's in. Itsuki stares, stunned and unable to move a fraction of a muscle. He somehow sees it too. He's able to recognize what he's looking at because he knows deep down inside what Izuku has become. The nerdy friend he knew during childhood idolized him and wanted to be like him almost as much as All Might. What Kitsuki sees is a nightmare version of himself. And he knows that he's partially to blame for it. Shinso shudders in his seat. The hairs raise on his arms, one hand shooting out to grab the other when he thinks about chainsaws splitting them down the middle. He shivers and sniffles, unable to stop himself from crying. What's worse than seeing the terrifying transformation in the arena are the reactions of the people around him. He can see the scared expressions that convey all sorts of judgment, and all that he can feel is guilt for sharing their minced, even if it were just for a second, and guilt for ever doubting Izuku when he said he can relate to having a villain's quirk. Shinso silently mouths an apology, bending his back as his body is racked with sobs, bowing as low as he can. Izuku raises a foot before tilting himself forward. He steps off of the ice that had cocooned him before sliding down the small slope right below. At the bottom, the slick surface comes to stop and his shoes scrape onto the concrete of the arena floor. Red stained snow litters the field as ice specks roll along like tumbleweeds. A chilling breeze passes through the gap between Todoroki and Izuku. Even with the view that present Mick has from the announcer booth as a commentator, he can't help but lean forward with keen anticipation. A shaky hand removes the sunglasses covering his eyes so that he can see without a tinted lens. Across from him, as always, side eyes every movement. It's rare that Mick is rendered speechless. Almost rarer than an entire stadium full of people to be as quiet too. Ashinori clutches his side, pawing at the injury beneath his shirt as his fingers curl the fabric into his palm. He grits his teeth to withhold himself from cursing. This close to the arena, watching from one of the field halls, he can feel the immense aura emitting from both boys. He wishes he had it in him to shift to his muscle form as All Might. He wants to break up the fight before it can get bloody, but knows that he can't while he's this weak. Watching from his office with dozens of screens to capture the stage from various angles, the principal of UA takes a long drawn-out sip from his cup of tea. Once finished, Nezu lowers the brim of his cup to flash a toothy grin. His beady black eyes glisten with specks of white when excitement makes his fur stand on end. He sets his tea down so that he can clasp his paws together with a clap. Hovering on wings as red as the blood staining the stage below, a pro-hero high above looks past the glacier that almost reaches him and directly at the boy with chainsaws. He hums while mulling some thoughts over in his head, gloved fingers tapping the yellow visor covering his eyes so that the tech within can give him an enhanced zoom for a good claw-soup. The jacket lined with fur hanging from his shoulders keeps him warm despite the iceberg that's nearby, but he floats downwards by a good margin anyways. Beeline eyes practically glued to the screen, a blonde bun girl cranes her neck to watch the television as closely as possible. She runs her tongue over the pointed tips of her fang teeth before it slides out of her mouth and drags along her lips in a swirling motion. Saliva dribbles down her chin as her body temperature rises and her face flushes red. Her hand finds itself under the skirt of her Safuku uniform, a moan eliciting itself from her mouth. Himiko Toga had eagerly waited long to see her friend again, but to see him as bloody and beautiful as this, she can't help but shudder with glee. Izuku arches a knee as he slowly crouches into a stance. Chainsaws whirring on each of his arms, he keeps them level at his sides. The blade protruding from his metallic forehead revs as he tilts his pointed chin down, the chain cutting the air with a swift motion. The amber orbs on either side of the thrumming engine that makes up his head intensify their glow. Todoroki responds in turn, one foot sliding back to get himself into a defensive position. His eyes finally blink and he forces them to make some semblance of a glare. The boy's right hand that had been hanging at his side flexes and emits a small amount of frost in preparation for something stronger. Present Mick swallows, the action reminding him that he has a throat and a voice that he can speak from with it. His eyes breaking contact with the arena and taking in the rest of his surroundings, he also remembers he has a job as a commentator. Mick grabs the microphone in front of him and holds it close to his mouth. Ladies and gentlemen. It seems that this match has only just begun. Izuku raises his arms, spreading them out, before throwing them up and bringing them together. The chainsaws clash on impact to create a collision of sparks when the moving blades briefly grind against each other. His mouth parts when the spinning blades do, an elongated tongue rolling out with spit flying in between the gaps of his equally long fangs. Izuku leaps to go airborne with the saliva, laughing giddily until the tongue twisting and whirling outside his mouth makes him appear dementedly deranged. As the feral chainsaw boy descends with a maniacal cackle, Todoroki can only grit his teeth together and brace himself. Chapter 27. The frantically savage swing of Todoroki's right arm permeates the air with a rapid spread of rhyme. Hoarfrost follows the extreme growth of verglas until a glacier of ice erupts into the sky. The monumental mountain of crystal becomes an extension of Todoroki's cold side, jagged protrusions of varying sizes still stretching outwards. Icicles stem off of spears and spires until it solidifies completely. Still in the process of his descent downwards, Todoroki's giant defensive structure now a blockade, Izuku pivots his body to face forwards. The chainsaw atop his head takes the lead, but he raises his arms to point them directly in the same position. Moving with as much momentum as he can use during freefall, Izuku starts to spin. Improvised move. The revving of the boy's chainsaws intensify when the spinning blades make contact with Todoroki's ice drill claw. Cold vapor hits the air as the glacier is drilled directly into, moisture coming off of flying fragments, while chainsaws chip away at the ice. Izuku's winding motion continues to carve inwards, his rotation quickening the pace that the verglas gets grinded down. Straight through and out the other side comes the chainsaws that created a hole down the middle. Izuku's spin stops and he rights himself before landing back on the ground. He comes to a halt directly in front of Todoroki, making Todoroki jolt in shock. One of Izuku's chainsaw-bladed arms swings upwards, stopping right under the other boy's chin. Despite the temperature being below zero, sweat rolls in big beads before dropping off and landing on the metal bar. The moving chain comes closer to Todoroki's throat as he dry swallows. "Is that all you got?" The thrumming engine that makes up Izuku's head filters his voice into a low growl. Todoroki's fear and shock shift to anger in response to the goading, his teeth gritting together when he growls back. Izuku moves his chainsaw away from the other boy's neck so they can continue their fight. Todoroki throws up another wall of ice, though this one much smaller than the prior two glaciers. Izuku hacks away at it with a swipe of his own arm, shattering the thin barrier like glass. "You're gonna need to try another move if you want to win with just your ice." The taunts are as bitter as the frostbite chewing at Todoroki's fingers when he reinforces the damage with another shielding of ice. "Or are you just all talk?" Izuku saws through the crystal sheeting just as easily as he had the other one. A thick coating of mildew covers Todoroki as he runs to the right, Izuku's gaslit eyes tracking the movement of a silhouette through the fog. When Izuku moves to follow his opponent, he feels that his feet won't budge. The boy's head turns down to see a thin spread of ice trailing from Todoroki to freeze his legs in place. Clever. The waft of condensation comes from Izuku's mouth as his tongue licks at his fangs, but it's you who has cold feet when it comes to their quirk, Todoroki. Just like he had done back at the USJ when he fought Nomu, a chainsaw splits his leg in half. The appearance of a new chainsaw breaks the ice surrounding that spot, allowing Izuku to tear himself free. Blood flakes the floor when he kicks upwards to throw himself after his opponent. "Damn it." Todoroki swears when he's forced to turn back and defend himself with another iceberg. Todoroki skids to a stop and unleashes a massive burst of verglas like he opened the match with, hoping that'll be enough. Izuku's synchronized shout with the roar of his chainsaw says otherwise. Izuku orientates his body while airborne to do a bicycle kick and slices through the ice in his way. In order to smash through the rest, his other leg rips itself open to let loose a chainsaw. Double-bladed, Izuku cuts into the glacier. Todoroki yells in retaliation, pushing past his limit to send a second wave of ice as a desperate attempt to replace what's damaged. All that does is harden the slope that Izuku lands on, giving him a perfect ramp. Using the chainsaws protruding from his legs, Izuku slides down as though he has ice skates on his feet. Todoroki has to whip his right arm back to create a wall behind himself when Izuku reaches the bottom, the impact throwing him off his feet and nearly out of the arena. Weaker than his past constructs, the ice cracks while trying to support his full weight leaning against it. Todoroki pushes off but stumbles and falls to one knee. He uses the back of his hand to wipe away the damp layer of sweat, sticking his hair to his forehead. Izuku falls back, landing on his backside, so that he leans against the glacier behind him to use as a crutch, should he need to get back up. The chainsaws extending from his legs start winding down, the spin of their metallic teeth coming to a stop before the others attach to Izuku's arms and head do. His eyes still glow a vibrant glare though. "When are you going to use your fire?" "Huh?" Todoroki raises his head to stare back. Through a layer of mist, he sees Izuku but mere feet away. Todoroki's heterochromic eyes harden as they squint to glare through the fog. To warm up, Izuku clarifies the meaning of his question with an inquisitive tilt of his head. "I don't think you'll be able to last much longer at this rate. Your cold quirk is gonna give you hypothermia if you aren't careful." He speaks matter-of-factly, almost casually. Todoroki isn't as nonchalant. He snaps with a bitterness to his bite. "Worry about yourself, Midoriya." The venom in his tone comes out of his mouth in the form of spit. "I'm fine so long as I continue revving my engine." Izuku shrugs his shoulders and sits up straight to rest his bare back on the ice behind him, despite being shirtless. "The motor keeps my blood pumping and, if anything, your ice keeps me from overheating." The rise and fall of Izuku's chest is in sync with the steady rumble of his engine, as though to say he's telling the truth. Todoroki glances at his right arm, the throbbing growth of purple around the blue, threatening to eat away at the limb. He forces his fingers to bend and closes his hand to make a fist, ignoring the numbness that gives him a lack of feeling as he does so. "Shut up and fight." Todoroki snarls while forcing himself back to his feet. Izuku nods, the chainsaws that had been protruding from his legs now fully retracted so that he can stand again too. "Ah, sure, I can do that." He hoops a finger through the hole that makes up the handle of the ripcord on his chest and pulls. Izuku's chainsaws rev back to life, blades already beginning to spin again until the metallic teeth become a winding blur. Izuku dashes at Todoroki, the latter barely ducking down in time to roll away from his warpath. Both boys pause after facing away from each other, but Izuku is faster to turn back around, a chainsaw-bladed arm catching Todoroki's back. The jacket is shredded straight to the flesh, metal tips nicking the exposed skin and ripping it apart. Todoroki cries out as his back gets torn into diagonally, flesh gnarled as it's torn by winding blades. Before the chainsaw cuts any deeper, he darts away with a trail of blood in his wake. Todoroki instinctively throws up his right hand to cast another spell of ice. Frost emits from the uncontained spiral of verglas that shoots out in response. Izuku falls back, but only to prepare a counter-strike by bringing his chainsaws together in order to form an X, the swipe of both blades at the same time, creating a stronger response to the collision. I told you that you'll have to do better than that. Izuku decimates the ice with his double swing. Todoroki slaps his hand down on the arena, ignoring the sharp sting of pain that shoots through his arm when he does so. A spread of ice covers the terrain, encasing the ground with a slippery surface. When he tries to stand up again, he can't help the flinch that comes in response to the ache of his back's wound. Nevertheless, he accomplished his goal. Izuku struggles to make it across the frozen floor, his movement slowed for the time being. Among the cheers of the crowded stadium, the classmates of the two fighters recoil and react with differing opinions of the match. Yayoi Rozu covers her eyes repeatedly, unable to watch, but always spreading them apart to catch a contradictory glimpse every so often. Uraraka shadowboxes, punching the air as though she's participating. Bushido nervously chews on her nails, biting them off until they're completely filed down. Isn't this going too far? Maybe somebody should stop it. Kaminari looks around for someone who'll agree with him, but everybody else is too fixated on the battle below to share his sentiment. He turns to the boy next to him, giving his classmate a nudge. Hey, don't you think so? He prods. Kirishima doesn't even spare Kaminari a glance. He vigorously shakes his head, no way. You can't put a stop to a fight between two men. He eagerly leans forward when the stadium shakes from a tremor caused by the battle. Kaminari sweat drops. Zero rubs the back of his head, chuckling to hide his disconcertment. Well. Midoriya is doing a lot better than I did. He has to wince when he sees the mark Izuku's chainsaws left on Todoroki, a lot better than I did. Izuku charges Todoroki, slashing through 4 barriers of ice that jut up in an effort to obstruct his path. The ice creator drops down, using the slick surface he made to slide out of the way, and fires off another round of verglas. Izuku whips an arm out to shatter the structure and continues the chase. Todoroki tumbles while desperately crafting more blockades in his wake. It's only a matter of time before Izuku catches up to him. From the commentator's booth, the battle appears as transparent as Todoroki's ice. At least, that should be the case. It's not quite as clear to see for present Mick, looks like these two powerhouses are evenly matched. He's not capable of seeing the bigger scale of the match or Aizawa's judgmental side-eyeing. Aizawa sighs before grabbing his own microphone to speak, one obviously has an advantage over the other if you look closely. Todoroki's ice has been gradually getting weaker during prolonged usage, not to mention his dulled movements. Things are going in Midoriya's favor if this match becomes a battle of attrition. Present Mick is glad nobody can see his embarrassment, faking a confident attitude as he responds to Aizawa's input. I see you noticed that too. Good attention to detail, Eraser. Aizawa gives his partner a deadpan look, but doesn't move his microphone away when he drawls back a response. Any competent pro hero would be able to notice that. Present Mick chuckles nervously, right. When the viewing booth trembles due to a shockwave emitted by the brawl below, he takes that as an opportunity to point and redirect Aizawa's attention. Well, maybe things will start heating up soon. Todoroki plants his hand in between his legs, a circle of snow forming a crystalline ring around him. The boy's next icy creation comes from below himself, carrying him upwards on a platform of his own making to escape Izuku's chainsaws. A tall pillar of ice stretches into the sky and gives Todoroki the higher ground. He lets out a breath of relief, the condensation from his mouth joining the clouds. Izuku tilts his head up as he approaches the pillar, humming to himself when he sees that it puts his opponent out of reach. The gaslit orbs that make up his eyes shift down to settle on the ice column, and he determines that it has to go. Izuku sweeps a chainsaw arm across the solid beam, carving into it. This ice structure proves sturdier than the previous ones. A last-ditch effort then. Izuku chops with his other arm, swinging both. The weight of the ice shifts a little, but not enough for it to topple yet. The winding blades fixed to the top of Izuku's head arc down and join the cutting process. Like a tall tree, the base that would be the ice tower's trunk begins to dwindle down. Izuku can't help the laugh that comes out of his mouth when he manages to finish sawing at the pillar. When the ice cracks, the chilling cackle reaches Todoroki's ears too late and he has to jump from his creation to escape its collapse. Fragments rain down like hail before the entire structure completely crumbles. Todoroki tumbles and rolls with a series of grunts until he uses his ice to stop himself with an impromptu wall. Izuku's chainsaws come down to a low hum, matching his soft pants. He takes small steps towards his opponent's near-prone position. "Todoroki. Why won't you use your fire?" Todoroki groans as he shifts his body to lurch itself back up. The bruises he sustained during his fall coupled with the gash on his back make it difficult for him to move quickly, but he perseveres anyways. "Why would you ask me that? When you're using your quirk when you said that you wouldn't?" He hisses his counter-argument through the seething of his teeth. Izuku comes to a stop. He watches as Todoroki struggles to stand across from him before answering, "Because of my mom." Todoroki freezes, succumbing to a state of petrification, having not expected that response. "She wanted me to show the world who I really am. Me. But this is my quirk." Izuku holds his head up high so that the steel of his chainsaw reflects against the sun's beams of light. "Did you ever think that yours wanted the same for you?" Todoroki's heavy pants gradually ease themselves to a more controlled form of breathing. Despite the quirk marriage he had been forced into, he does recall his mother telling him to be a hero, fire aspect of his quirk and all. Tears dry until they hiss upon turning into steam. The numb effect of hypothermia subsides from his right arm as it warms up. Flames spark along Todoroki's left side until igniting and becoming a larger fire. "Thank you, Midoriya, you helped me remember." Todoroki ignores the encouraging shouts of his father from the spectator stands and focuses on the memory of his mother's encouragement instead, "But don't blame me for what happens next. Looks like we're both finally giving it all that we've got now." Izuku bares his fangs into some semblance of a pointed grin before reaching for the string attached to his sternum. "Let's wrap this up then. Shall we?" He already used so much of his blood on the first couple of pulls. He estimates this is the last one that he has left in him. Despite putting on a good show until now, Izuku knows that this is going to be difficult for him to push through without operating at his full potential. Nevertheless, he yanks on the cord and his chainsaws rev with a roar as abrupt as the harsh tug. Bursts of flame flicker out haphazardly, taking Izuku by surprise. Judging by the startled flinch of reaction from Todoroki, he's surprised by the lack of restraint to this side of his power too. It's then that Izuku realizes and remembers his opponent must have little to no experience using this part of his ability. Todoroki lacks the control needed to aim and utilize his fire properly. Izuku's pointed teeth spread apart, stretching his grin and allowing his tongue to roll out. He appears almost sadistic when he starts to see Todoroki's weakness as an exploitable means to win the match. "Come on." Izuku charges into the inferno with reckless abandon. Todoroki gasps with shock, surprised to see his opponent rushing in so carelessly. The fire lashes out in response. Flames as long and thick as tentacles reach for Izuku. "I said. Come on." Izuku dodges left and strafes right to avoid being struck, but doesn't stop his sprint forwards. Todoroki grinds his teeth together, struggling as he tries to gain some control over his fire. In an effort to create a focal point and outlet the flames, he dwindles the edges down in order to compress them. Balls begin to expand and burn bright, launching themselves into Izuku's path. Though those are more refined and faster than the appendages, Izuku still manages to dodge them. Fireballs fly over the boy's head as he ducks down. Izuku is practically upon Todoroki by the next second, forcing Todoroki to release what little control that he had over his flames for them to expand. Hoping to wall Izuku off like he would if he were using his ice, fire spreads in a solid line to raise skywards. The impromptu shield comes in between the two with sweltering heat, dark smoke inhaled by both boys. Except while Todoroki suffers from a coughing fit, Izuku continues to push through. Chainsaws pass through the fire, screeches sounding like the gates of hell opening up. Terrified eyes of mismatched color expand under the hot glare, watching elongated fangs and metallic teeth lick flames. Fire coats Izuku's bare body and burns that expose muscle tissue that's damp with blood. The sight is horrifying enough to make Todoroki stagger back, the flames radiating from his left side condensing around his fist, and his right side instinctively flash freezing a spray of ice. The combination of opposing elements causes a frictional heatwave that separates him from Izuku, the superheated blast cooling the air that replaces what gets evaporated. Hawks bats his wings, flapping them hard in order to fly out of range from the sudden expansion of heat. Even from his height, he feels the radiation of warmth that Todoroki's attack emits. The temperature drastically changes, shifting to a colder level in the blink of an eye. He's suddenly glad he's wearing his jacket. The crossing of ice and fire proved to be powerfully effective. Or has it? A huge updraft of gray smoke covers the arena below, concealing the combatants within. And the sound of a running chainsaw still echoes from inside. When the smoke starts to dissipate and it clears away from the battlefield, both boys are somehow still standing upright. But Present Mick notes one thing is different from the other. He removes his sunglasses, standing up from his seat and leaning forward to make sure he sees it correctly. There's no mistaking it from his view within the commentator's booth. But as he's about to announce what decides the victor of the match, Aizawa beats him to it. As lazily unenthusiastic as one could possibly sound, Aizawa announces, Todoroki is out of bounds. Midoriya wins. The crowd goes wild. Cheers erupt from everyone throughout the stadium. Kyoka would be joining them if she weren't so busy using her hands to cover her ears. Kirishima and Shiro give each other a manly hug to celebrate Midoriya's victory, tears of joy in their eyes. Uraraka pumps a fist into the air as if she's the one who won. Toshinori exhales with relief, body somehow deflating even further. Itsuki stands up and uses the commotion to slip away unnoticed. Todoroki looks down to see he's behind the white line that marks where the ring begins and ends. He has to blink to make sure that he's seeing correctly and then realizes he must have been startled enough by Izuku coming through the flames that he stepped backwards too far. A sigh escapes his lips, tension leaving his system along with the adrenaline that kept him going throughout the match. When he raises his head to face Izuku and congratulate him with a respectful bow, he's shocked to see the boy wobbling with difficulty to remain standing. The chains on the saw mount stop their spinning, coming to a complete stop. The fire that was torching his skin and flesh has gone out and his blood is dried into crusty patches. Except, the third-degree burns aren't healing. Izuku sways forward and then backwards, his heel catching himself before he can trip. The gurgled grunt is the only noise that the boy manages to make before falling backwards again. This time, he doesn't catch himself. Izuku lands on his back, arms and legs sprawled out. Ox flies back until his feet brush against the stadium's outer wall, giving him a good spot to perch himself. From there, he watches medical bots swarm the stage where the UA students fought, marking the official end of the match. The hero's gloved fingers tap the lens of his yellow visor to deactivate the zooming function before reaching into his pants pocket. A sigh of relief escapes his mouth when he checks his cell phone and sees no notifications yet. With a flap of his widespread wings, he takes to the sky again before anybody can spot him. After Izuku is whisked away on a stretcher, he receives treatment from Recovery Girl to prepare him for his next match. Blood bags to give him a much-needed transfusion hang on dollies from either side of the bed from he lays in. All of his burns begin to heal, albeit slowly, the exposed flesh starts subsiding. There's a television showing Kitsuki's match against Uraraka, but he ignores it, already knowing which of the two he'll have to face for the final round. Izuku closes his eyes and asks Recovery Girl, "Can you give me the room alone please? Just for a few minutes." The elder heroine looks at Izuku, contemplative of whether she should or not, before nodding and leaving him be. As soon as she shuts the sliding door behind her to give him his privacy, Izuku breaks down. The boy's eyes reopen, watering at the edges before tears spill over the brim. A sob racks his entire frame, followed by plenty more. Being in a hospital bed like this, with the sports festival playing on a TV set, reminds him of his mother. Even though he won against Todoroki, she didn't get to see the victory. And he'll never see her again either. Izuku curls his arms and legs inwards, taking on a fetal position. He feels like a kid again. This is exactly how it was after he had lost Pochita. Nobody to hold. Nothing to hug for comfort. Just pure loneliness. He remembers his mom would sit on the edge of his bed after a while, the mattress sinking when she would, and then she would tell him what he needed to hear. Now there's no words of wisdom to save him. He has to face the bully that made him feel alone the most during childhood during a new time of loneliness. And he doesn't know if he can. It had been different fighting Todoroki. He had a reason. A cause. There's nothing that he can do for Kitsuki. Their fight seems almost meaningless. Izuku reaches for the string attached to his sternum. It fits right in his palm. When his fingers close around it, he doesn't think to clench his fist tight. He starts thinking about his quirk. When he fought Todoroki, he had shown it to the world. But like Todoroki's fire, he never used it enough to hone it well. With his match against Kitsuki, maybe he can benefit from fighting after all. The battle between Uraraka and Kitsuki concludes with Kitsuki coming out as the victor, as expected. Izuku dries his tears with the bed sheets and starts looking ahead. The fight he had with Kitsuki during their battle trials taught him something, which seemed to be what Kitsuki was trying to do in a weird way. Maybe this rematch will be the lesson learned for him to apply what he now knows. Within the commentator's booth, Aizawa receives word from Toshinori about the passing of Izuku's mother. Each of them share grim expressions, present Mick looking as equally concerned by the news. Outside the viewing window, the stage has been set for the final match, the crowd rearing to see the top two contenders duel. We shouldn't allow them to fight, Toshinori glances between each commentator pleadingly, not after what happened last time, when both of them continue to appear pensive about the decision, he can't keep a frustrated frown off his face. Midoriya is emotionally compromised. There's no telling what could happen. Aizawa gently takes the paper Toshinori is holding away from his hands to make a closer inspection. After a moment of reading, he sighs and hands it back. Look at the time of death. If Midoriya was completely conscious during his match with Todoroki, I'd say he has a handle on his emotions well enough. Aizawa turns away so that he can watch Kitsuki and Izuku take the field. Toshinori steps closer, also seeing the fighters prepare. Exactly. Look at his match with Todoroki. It was completely out of control. He looks to Mick for help when Aizawa doesn't spare him even a glance. Show. Present Mick starts to reach for Aizawa's shoulder, but the man pulls away. Maybe that's how the match appeared to a novice, but anyone able to read between the lines would have been able to see Midoriya was actively trying to help Todoroki instead of just fighting. Aizawa finally faces Toshinori before concluding his point. Midoriya had ample opportunities to end the match earlier, but pushed his opponent to use their full potential. Toshinori blinks, as though his vision has suddenly been fixed, and he can now see clearly. What Aizawa saw during that match was what he had seen in the boy to offer Ofa. Toshinori is ashamed to say he had nearly forgotten. He and present Mick share a look of agreement before he agrees to let the match carry through. Then he leaves to get a good seat in the bleachers. Izuku steps into the arena the same time that Kitsuki does. Once they're past the line that marks the stage that's been set for them, present Mick begins the countdown. Kitsuki bares his teeth and pops a few explosions from his palms to warm up. With a steady hand, Izuku unzips his jacket to get at the ripcord underneath. The crowd's cheers drown out and all that they hear are each other's growls. Now for what you've been waiting for. Present Mick gets a drumroll going and grins when the crowd starts stomping their feet or clapping along to it. Who will be crowned the champion of this year's sports festival? He grabs the microphone and practically screams into it, let's find out. Begin. The sound of chainsaws reverberate when Izuku pulls the cord attached to his chest. Explosions detonate behind Kitsuki when he throws his hands back. And the two meet in the middle, sparks flying from winding blades amidst fire and smoke. A saw passes over Kitsuki's head as he crouches down. Metallic teeth clip strands of the boy's ashy blonde hair. Izuku swings his other arm in an upward arc, the spinning chain on the bar coming close to his opponent's face. But Kitsuki carries himself away with a few controlled blasts from his hands, dodging every sweep of Izuku's chainsaws. Close combat proves challenging for the blonde, forcing him to bite down hard and change tactics. He shifts his shoulders to fire off an explosion below himself and pivots in the air to flip behind Izuku. Kitsuki's other arm is outstretched so that he can detonate the next blast directly into Izuku's bare back. Izuku rolls with the force of the blast, catching himself so that he can jump right back up to his feet. When he spins around, he's met by a residual explosion that forces him to draw back even further. Izuku lashes out blindly through the thick smoke that starts to surround him, swinging at it both to clear it away and hopefully land a cut on his opponent. Kitsuki keeps his distance though, hopping back. Still just chopping aimlessly, Deku Kitsuki strafes to the side in order to avoid Izuku's charge before countering with a double-handed detonation. The explosion sends Izuku reeling. Kitsuki follows up with another blast that completely knocks the other boy off his feet. No wonder you and Kandakane were such a good matchup. You two only ever use the same moves. Kitsuki's confidence dissipates with the smoke that clears away from Izuku. He sees Izuku crossing his chainsaws to make a defensive X formation, the metallic blades covered in soot, having shielded him from the blast. Kakin. The blonde is even more startled when he hears his opponent refer to him by his childhood nickname again. Shut up. Izuku darts forwards, taking Kitsuki further by surprise, the sudden shift in speed completely unexpected. The blonde retaliates with an explosion centered down the middle of the arena. Izuku sidesteps to the right, changing the direction that he's sprinting. The fire passes him by. Kitsuki growls and sets off two explosions at once, one from each hand on either side. Izuku once again changes his movements, shifting back to the center of the ring. The distance now shortened enough, Izuku leaps with his chainsaws raised over his head. Both boys yell, Izuku coming down and Kitsuki jumping out of the way. Spinning blades grind into the ground where Kitsuki had been standing. Specks of concrete pelt the blonde as the stage is chipped into. Seething through his bared teeth, Kitsuki spins back around to force Izuku back by firing off another explosion. Though, the blast barely does anything to delay the boy from pushing forward for another attack. Kitsuki has to retreat in order to avoid being cut. Izuku slashes at his opponent, reinforcing his push by stepping into the swings. The extra force puts enough pressure on Kitsuki to keep him at bay. It's all about the footwork, shifting with every change of pattern the other boy makes. Izuku had been so focused on watching Kitsuki's hands in the past, worried about explosions or punches, that he never thought outside the box like this before. A good rush at the right moment is all Izuku needs to throw Kitsuki off balance. But Kitsuki catches on quickly, retaking his balance with controlled bursts from his hands to make up for his footwork. Izuku's chainsaws pass the blonde by when the blasts move the body side to side with just as much force. Nice try, nerd. Kitsuki retakes the lead and pushes back with a larger explosion, but I'm still better than you. Izuku's sneakers scratch the ground as he's blasted back by a small shockwave, but he stops himself by planting a chainsaw directly into the floor that betrayed him. The sturdy crutch lets him regain his balance, while simultaneously granting an opportunity to charge back into the fray. The chainsaw tears itself free and swings with the other as Izuku runs into more fire. "You were saying?" I said. Kitsuki hisses when he has to make an effort to avoid the next barrage of chainsaw swings. The blonde's wrists bend to point down so that he can launch himself into the air. "I'm better than you." The maneuver then grants Kitsuki the ability to fire off explosions from above. Izuku shields himself with his chainsaws, but to no avail protects his body. After Izuku gets rocked around, he helplessly flails at the air with his chainsaws. Not only did his cerebrum get dizzied, but Kitsuki remains airborne with controlled blasts to keep out of range. The next round of explosions burn into Izuku, searing his skin. He tries raising his arm bars to defend himself, but Kitsuki's orientation is much faster in the air. Izuku hacks at the next detonation, unable to do much else. When the winding blade split the explosion in two, Izuku's amber orbs expand in shock. Izuku repeats the offensive action, making it his best defense. Again, Kitsuki's explosion gets severed before it can expand into a full blast. Ah! Izuku can't resist the chuckle that gradually grows into full-blown laughter when he begins dissecting all of the ensuing explosions after that. "Looks like it's you who'll have to switch things up now, Kakin." "Sure." Kitsuki sneers as he aims his outstretched arm a little differently. "I've been wanting to try something new for a while now anyways." A circle of smoke puffs from a light collection of sparks, embers burning only at the epicenter of Kitsuki's palm, through the hole he creates. Instead of a broad explosion, he fires a concentrated beam through the hoop. AP shot. He announces his new move while he detonates a blast from a single point instead of his whole hand. Izuku cries out when he feels the focused blast shoot through his side like a bullet. Charred flesh sizzles as blood spurts out of the hole that's been made. Kitsuki smirks with satisfaction and repeats the same action. Izuku attempts to block the laser with an arm bar this time. When the beam gets deflected, only the air pressure is what affects Izuku. Both boys recoil in shock, having not expected the steel to survive the concentrated heat. Viewing the entire exchange from the stands of the stadium, Kirishima grabs two clumps of his hair to express his awe. "Gah. They're just both so manly. Who am I supposed to root for?" His classmates mumble and nod along, them all gauging the power dynamic of the match with difficulty as well. Haminari looks over to see everyone is actually listening this time, and joins in. Heh. He thrusts a thumb at himself while flashing a cocky grin. "I know who I'm rooting for. Bakubro, of course. He's got this." Ashido squirms in her seat, restless and indecisive like Kirishima. She turns towards the boy next to her and asks for his opinion on the match. "What about you, Todoroki? Who do you want to win?" Midoriya. The answer comes so easily for him that it makes a few people sweat drop. He doesn't notice their reaction the slightest bit though, gaze set on the battle below, his heterochromic eyes completely transfixed and uncaring of everything else. "I guess that makes sense." Ashido starts searching for somebody else to pester when she figures she won't be able to get much more of a reaction out of him. And smirks when she sees familiar prey. "I guess that also means we know who Jiro is rooting for then." The Pincat wiggles her eyebrow suggestively while teasing the punk rocker. Shut it. Kyoka falls for the bait when a blush completely consumes her face. Hook, line, and sinker. She falls victim to even more teasing, others joining in now. An explosion bigger than the rest Katsuki had produced rattles off when he descends from his flight pattern. The arena quakes when the disruptive blast cracks its shell, fractured concrete splitting the floor into a spiderweb pattern and throwing Izuku off balance. Using the momentum of his detonation to fling himself forward, Katsuki flows with more blasts until he's face to face with his opponent. Still disoriented from suddenly losing his footing, Izuku can do little more than gasp as Katsuki closes in. The vibrant orange illumination is blinding as the sun emits from Katsuki's hands. A flashbang of sorts follows, wide engulfing Izuku's vision. Then Katsuki goes for the kill, grabbing onto each part of Izuku's arms that won't carve his hands up. Massive explosions overtake the space between the two, but Katsuki doesn't let go. Izuku shouts at the top of his lungs, pulling back when scorching pain destroys his arms. Izuku staggers back, blood spraying the grassy field beyond where concrete is painted in a pool of red. Torn ligaments and mangled flesh hang from damaged metal. Each bar is beyond broken, shattered remains breaking off and letting chains droop limply until completely coming loose. Katsuki practically blew off each of Izuku's arms. Audible reactions of distress and disgust sweep over the stands of the stadium. Kirishima's mouth hangs agape, while Kyoka covers hers to muffle her wet cry. Todoroki blinks, hard, mouth twitching to bend beyond more than just a thin line. Shiozaki continues chanting prayers, while Monoma shouts profanities. Kendo catches Pony when she faints. Ashinori grimaces, glancing in the direction of the commentator's booth, wondering if Aizawa and Mick feel as guilty as he for allowing the match to happen. The pro-hero Best Jeanist pinches the skin between his eyes, which had nearly popped out of his head when seeing such brutality and savagery. I've got my work cut out for me this year. Emiko's fangs form a broad grin when the TV provides her with a close-up of the damage to Izuku's arms. The ecstasy that she felt while watching the match between Izuku and Todoroki returns tenfold. Feline eyes sparkle as they study all of the grotesque glory to the gnarled limbs. The bunned blonde starts salivating so much that she begins to drool. Heat rushes throughout her body, face tinting red to match Izuku's blood, and her hand travels downwards once more. Soft pants get heavier and faster as she pleasures herself. And just when she thinks it can't get any better, it does. The chains dangling from the remains of Izuku's mutilated arms rattle with a sudden jolt. As though the wind swept them up, the strings of jagged metal teeth loop into an arc. Spiraling with a mind of their own like snakes coiling around prey, the fetters wrap themselves to snare Katsuki. Tightening to keep him trapped, the barbed wire breaks his skin and cuts into his flesh. Then, Izuku simultaneously gets pulled with Katsuki so that they collide with each other and the chains can be more secured. The fuck Katsuki's words get cut off when the chainsaw mounted to Izuku's motorized skull motions to position itself by the blonde's throat. Settling the still spinning blades of his remaining chainsaw to whir beneath Katsuki's chin, Izuku bares his fangs to make a victorious grin. I remembered what you told me. Izuku's gaslit eyes glower when they meet Katsuki's scarlet stare. I remembered when you told me to apply myself. Katsuki's glare breaks, eyes broadening to see the bigger picture. Both boys reflect on their fight during the battle trial and their current match. The innovative way to subdue his opponent came from the way Katsuki spurred him on to use his quirk in more creative ways. Looks like you're finally starting to give a shit about your shitty quirk, Katsuki huffs. He struggles in the bindings that only dig pointed tips deeper into him, the more he tries to wriggle free. Izuku takes notice and ceases the escape attempt by bringing his chainsaw closer to Katsuki's jugular. Submit, Izuku demands. When Katsuki doesn't respond, he says it louder so that everyone can hear. Surrender. I've got you. Izuku's voice carries itself far enough into the stands to earn some cheers and applause. Kyoka smiles, having heard it the first time. TCH. Katsuki tilts his head down as far as he dares too near the chainsaw beneath his chin. When he sees that he can bend his wrists enough to position his hands away from his face, he clicks his tongue and raises his head to look Izuku in the eyes again. As if. He releases a cluster of miniature explosions, eat shit. The trail of detonations leads into the sky, every blast raising the boys higher and higher. Becoming a living missile, Katsuki's launch starts gaining more traction. Izuku grits his teeth and grunts as he goes along for the ride. Their flight path propels into a more circular motion once they breach the stadium's open roof. The tornado of fire forms as Katsuki builds up oxygen to fuel his most powerful explosion thus far. The burst to send them back down the way that they came, but now through a tunnel of flames, is a forceful push that carries them down much faster than the pull of gravity. All of Katsuki's firepower accumulates to one point. That's when he blasts himself free of Izuku's chains to separate himself from the blast radius. And Izuku drops straight into a destructive discharge of explosive power. Howitzer impact. Katsuki announces his ultimate finishing super move as it completely engulfs his opponent in a blaze of glory. The blast consumes the entire arena, expanding and then shrinking in an instant. A massive smokescreen covers the field as Katsuki slows his descent with smaller controlled bursts. The crowd goes silent, watching and waiting for the dark cloud to clear itself away so they can see the outcome of the match. Todoroki leans forward, heterochromic eyes squinting. Ioka stands up, listening for Izuku's faint heartbeat somewhere within the smoke. Even after the smog subsides, it's difficult to get a good look at anything but a giant crater from where Izuku made impact on the stage. Katsuki peers over the edge of the caldera he made, spotting Izuku at its epicenter. The boy is back to his human form, chainsaws completely retracted. Despite some scrapes and burns covered by black soot, he's back in one piece. Katsuki figures the nerd must have revved his engine again on the way down, but didn't have enough blood left in him after his last match to do anything other than heal a bit. He flexes his hands, bursting the blisters from his own over-excessive usage of his quirk. Had the fight gone on a little longer, the outcome could have went either way. Present Mick sees Izuku's unconscious body from the commentator's booth and announces the official ending result of this year's sports festival. Katsuki Bakugo takes first place in a dynamite manner. Hawk slid his hands into his pockets at some point, not realizing he had done so, which is why he jolts a bit when he feels his cell phone vibrating. He pulls it out to read the caller ID. The abbreviation HPSC flashes in bold blue kanji. Hawks has no choice but to answer. He holds the device close to his ear, listening. His eyes fold back down to the arena, landing on Izuku. He closes them after a while, unable to bear looking at the kid anymore. He just focuses on listening again. He listens and waits. Once he receives his orders, he finally reopens his eyes and he sees that the field has been cleared. Hawks flaps his wings to soar away from the stadium. Yes, ma'am, then hangs up his phone. Chapter 28. Resplendent as they are aureate, eyes layered by the 7 circles of hell, gaze through a polycarbonate and aluminum oxynitride window. The Hero Public Safety Commission installed this particular glass after a mishap with their ex-agent infamously known as Lady Nagant. Even her unique ammunition lacks the firepower to crack this bulletproof window, let alone pierce through or shatter it. Golden orbs as reflectant as the sun shimmering in the sky take in the cityscape view of Japan. None of the skyscrapers reach the heights of the HPSC's ivory tower. From the top level of the headquarters, nothing appears capable of reaching it. Wooden doors adopting French architecture lurch open, barely making a noise as they do. Those aforementioned golden eyes of extravagance continue staring forward, but now look at the window's reflection to see who enters the boardroom. Kigo Takami, otherwise known as Hawks, warily steps into the office space. He glances left and right to see executives and other big wigs dressed in business suits. Notable faces occupy cush chairs at a long table, one of which is the newly appointed vice president, Yakimura Mara. Hawks takes his seat next to him. A moment of silence passes, even as the French doors slowly swing themselves shut. I'm glad you could make it, Takami-tan. I was worried the traffic from the sports festival would have kept you. The owner of golden circled eyes speaks so softly that the quiet nature of the room somehow stays. It begins to become an eerie deaf tone, whispering in the ears of Hawks. The hero swallows the breath that he realizes he's been holding before replying. That's usually not a problem I have while flying first class. His joke falls flat, even after he furrows his wings for emphasis. The rough landing makes him instinctively wince. The room's silence is still damning. The woman at the head of the table smiles slightly before turning away from the window and facing the board. The braided part of her luxurious red locks sway with the movement, but her bangs remain still at eye level, a judgmental stare scaling the weight of her golden gaze. She wears a form-fitting black dress that sets her apart from the others. As though just now noticing the difference between herself and everyone else present, her head tilts to one side. Shall we begin? She lacks the proper punctuation to make the word she speaks an actual question. Hawks understands that's because what the director of the HPSC says tends to be an order. Any sort of democracy the hero divisions had became null and void when she took on her position. This woman took complete control of the entire department, and everyone here knows better than to challenge her authority. So, Hawks nods along with everybody else present in the room. When the director tilts her head to the opposite side of her lean, indicating that she's waiting for a verbal response, he speaks like everyone else as well. He swallows and says the same as the others. "Yes, Miss Makima." Makima settles into her seat at the head of the table, satisfied with the attentive response of her fellow chairman. A precisional method of sliding the manila folders the way a croupier deals cards comes with smooth swipes of her hands. When Hawks gets the remaining file slid to him, he wastes no time flipping it open to read its contents. He feels Makima's eyes on him while his take in what's been presented. The subject matter for today's meeting. She pauses as though for dramatic effect. But Hawks already knows what she's about to say. If the photo included in his information packet wasn't enough, he's able to recognize the name on the handout after this year's sports festival. It's expected, but the hero still feels a pang in his chest when he hears Makima confirm it. Is whether or not Izuku Midoriya should be ordained into the HPSC initiative. One of the board members, Hawks didn't bother to remember his name, feigns a cough to clear his throat before using that same hand to signal for everyone's attention. He's one of the company's elders if his canyon-deep wrinkles are any indication. Whatever hair he has left on his head is as dull a gray as his business suit attire. It's quite clear this boy has a quirk that's not so glamorous. Regardless of our influence, there's no plausible future where he'd be placed in the spotlight. The man glances about as he makes his point, but comes across as unsure of himself by doing so. At one point, he even meets Hawk's gaze. That's when Hawks realizes the man is likely just avoiding making eye contact with Makima. A second businessman, much younger than his senior, tries to be more confident with his input. Tell that to hero influencers like Ryuki or Gang Orca. Civilian and fan appeal have been in favor of scarier looking heroes lately. Times are changing, the next generation liking gruff types like Endeavor more and more each day. The last part seemed below the belt enough to make the older businessman hunch over with embarrassment, but everyone in the room otherwise agrees with that sentiment by nodding and murmuring with approval. Until Makima raises a hand to hush them, the bare palm she presents much more evocative than words. Both notions have already been regarded during this election. She makes most of the board stir in their seats when they realize they have to squirm for something else to comment on, rather than open up the table to discussion. I would like for us to consider what has already been determined. Nobody makes a move. Not one person dares lift a finger or raise a hand. The only movement of mouths is the clenching of jaws. Makima waits nonetheless before continuing. Unlike our much adored number 2 who's currently present with us, Hawks feels his own cheekbones tightening with the rest of his body tensing upon being singled out. My goal is not to glorify Midoriya as the next big hero. Rather, while taking steps as not to repeat former mistakes, I would like for us to focus our efforts on making Midoriya the next Lady Nagant. Makima's proposition muzzles the board, leaving them more speechless than they were before. She smiles when there's no verbal opposition. Then she clasps her hands together, like a true exec would. It's not typical for a gun to be associated with a hero, much less a chainsaw. However, an operative who works outside of the spotlight and in the shadows as an assassin Midoriya would make an excellent attack dog. Hawk struggles to fight against how hard his teeth clamp together. He wants to say something in Midoriya's defense, make an effort, do anything he can to somehow divert this fate. He needs to. But there's a pressure weighing him down that keeps his mouth closed. The heaviness is so much that he bites his tongue. The pain that suddenly flares up makes his jaw untighten for the slightest of seconds. It's enough. Like the words that wish to escape his mouth, so does his throbbing tongue. He's just a boy. Hawks blurts out what he wants to say while he can. Which earns him a bunch of looks. But he doesn't care. Because now that the attention is on him and not Makima, he can finally speak. Midoriya is only a child, not an animal, not a wild dog. But Makima has an answer for that, not upon closer examination, and all eyes are drawn back to her. During his evaluation, how he handles his quirk was inspected. Several reports acquired from UA helped us determine just what kind of animal Midoriya is, and a wild dog is as accurate a description as any. Makima procures a manila folder that wasn't previously made available and unveils the file's contents herself to support her statement. Hawks hardens his stare when he sees pictures of mutilated and mangled bodies. These are a result of Izuku Midoriya. She flips from one photo to the next in order to provide the board with a close-up shot of the damage. We didn't need to perform autopsies to figure out what caused this kind of injury. Hawks has seen the difference between the clean cut a blade makes and the jagged curve a set of claws can leave behind. Whatever this is, a misshapen carving with no pattern, leads his imagination to chainsaws. These were villains participating in the USJ incident, but even so, you can only imagine the repercussions Mr. Midoriya would have faced had this gotten out to the general public. Makima closes the folder when several board members gag at the images. The HPSC struck a deal with UA's principal to avoid mass hysteria in favor of Midoriya's hero record remaining unhindered. It is now time to capitalize on this arrangement. Hawks forgets to fold his wings when he leans back, the rough edge of his chair applying pressure to his spine as it straightens. He blinks back the shock of what he just heard, realizing that things only make more sense now, that this shouldn't come as a surprise. Makima had her eyes on Midoriya since before even the sports festival. She had just been waiting for an opportune moment to make her move. He can imagine the woman playing UA's principal in a match of chess, Nezu losing a very valuable piece off the board now. Unless, the HPSC hadn't even had to resort to blackmail, and Nezu proved his nature more of a rat than just his appearance. Hawks shakes his head, trying to stay ever the optimist, no matter how difficult. In that case, we should avoid applying any more attention to him than necessary, no. Hawks resists the urge to scratch the itch of his feathers rustling when Makima fixes him with an intense stare. He instead drags his nails against his scalp, feigning to be picking through his hair. An internship with the number 2 hero would only be shining the spotlight on him. He tries to rationalize the situation in his favor, but can't help but doubt himself under the director's glare. Unlike your unfortunate Paideia, Midoriya would benefit from the tutelage of his predecessor. The rings illuminated by the luminescence of Makima's eyes, focus like the crosshair of a sniper's scope. Would I be mistaken under that assumption? Hawks shivers like a newborn chick. No, ma'am. He wonders whether or not Lady Nagant would have had an influence on him had he been trained by her. Perhaps he'll be able to help Midoriya in a way that she would have been unable to help him. Maybe, still being ever the optimist, this will be a good thing. Yakumiru Mera raises his head, appearing almost as though he had dozed off during the meeting. Considering how low the bags beneath his eyes are hanging, he may very well have. We can always consider the alternative. He removes a paperclip from the collective sheet of papers in front of him. Before pushing a particular page to the table's center, we might want to think about taking a direct approach as we had done with Takami. After all, Hawks resists the urge to react to his own name and origin being mentioned. But when he leans forward to see why Mera never closed his file on Midoriya like the others had, he understands the correlation. Makima responds with a single nod first, a silent affirmation. Mr. Midoriya recently lost his mother to illness. With his father's residence in America and Midoriya's pursuit of education being here in Japan, we may have yet another opportunity to take action as Mera suggested. She compares the shared center document with her own copy before nodding a second time. This is certainly an avenue we'll explore. However, I would still like for Takami to offer Midoriya with an internship. Consider it a form of insurance. Hawks mumbles his agreement with the rest of the board, the motion carried. He had hoped to spare Midoriya. Another student of UA showed signs of a bird-related quirk. He had planned to go with the unassuming angle of birds flocking together. But he knows that suggestion would be overruled now. Even if he were to request a dual internship, Makima would make Midoriya his priority. All he can do now is hope the kid is well rested and ready for what's about to come. Makima turns her back on the board, her dark dress a shadow that trails behind her. Clouds have gathered overhead, blotting out the sun. The city appears to be asleep. Buildings hang low and high, a hospital at the epicenter. Windows glisten but don't reflect what the world holds in store. All anyone can do now is wait for the wake. Izuku sheds his sleep slowly. Before he opens his eyes, he first registers what he hears. What sounds like somebody scratching at the door to be let in has him turning his head to see who it could be. The boy's eyelids fully flutter open when he sees Kaio Kajiru. The girl is sitting next to him. The noise he heard is her pencil scratches in a notebook. Izuku gradually recalls his location and figures out why his classmate would be present at his bedside. The final match of the sports festival had put him in the recovery ward. She must have been worried. Still slightly sluggish, he barely raises his hand to wave before it flops back down. Hey. But he does enough to get the girl's attention. She jumps at the sound of his voice, clearly having not expected him to wake up yet. Midoriya. She snaps the notebook she's holding shut. The pencil she had been using drops before bouncing against the hard-tiled floor and rolling away. Ah. Crap. She motions to go after it before deciding not to. I'll call for a nurse or… No. Not yet, please. Izuku strains to sit up in an effort to stop her, but fails miserably. Kyoka moves back to his side, if not for the sake of his request, then out of concern for his weakened state. I just woke up and I'm not up to it yet. He sinks back into the cushioning of the bed and pillow as he gives in to his body's protests against moving. Okay. Fine, Kyoka hesitates, but ultimately gives in when she sees how big and round his pleading eyes are. He's like a damn puppy in one of those rescued animal commercials. Recovery girl did say her quirk without a blood transfusion this time would do a number on you. She sits back down and prepares to fill him in on what he missed. But Izuku musters up the strength to shrug it off, showing her that he doesn't care to know much more. She recalls the moment before his matches and figures she'd feel the same way if her mom died. The boy's eyes drift downwards. For a moment, she thinks he's dozing off again or becoming lost in thought. But then she realizes his gaze is on her lap and what she's holding in it. What were you working on? Kyoka shrinks in on herself, wanting to hide when she feels her face heating up. Stupid. How could you just ask me that? She mutters to herself her complaints since she can't actually take it out on him during his time of distress. I was. Her voice catches in her throat. Something that usually only happens when her parents try to make her sing in public. If she could give some of Izuku the blood that's rushing to her face, she would. Kyoka slaps her cheeks before mumbling, I was writing you a song. She dares to glance over at the boy in order to gauge his reaction. She's shocked to see his eyes could somehow get even bigger and brighter. Wow, really? That's amazing, Jiru. Maybe I could sing it sometime. He only realizes what he said after the words leave his mouth. It's his turn to flush completely red, all of whatever blood is left in his body making itself visible. Be dummy. Kyoka resists the urge to stab him with her ear axe. She squirms in her seat while trying to avoid eye contact, no longer brave enough to look at him. Trying to change the subject to save himself from embarrassment, Izuku clears his throat before asking, hey. Didn't your original hero costume come with support gear? Kyoka looks back at him, confused. Yeah. Why? Her jacks lower from their poised position to untangle themselves and hang loosely. Izuku smiles, it was a katana, right? He closes and reopens his hands into fists before explaining himself. Kaken said all I do is swing my chainsaws around. The loss of his match makes his smile wilt a bit. Maybe you could, I dunno, teach me some techniques. Just a few to get some kinda style established. But his eyes remain bright and hopeful. Kyoka has to look away again. Sure, she tries to play it cool and not get flustered this time. I mean, I don't know a lot, that's why I decided to ditch it. But I think I know enough that I might be able to help you with that. Her nervous tick of twirling an ear jack on her finger makes a return. I didn't think anyone would have noticed that about me. I did. Izuku's response makes the jack coil and tighten like a tuned guitar string. But his follow-up makes her heart thump heavy in her chest like a drum. You're a girl that's hard not to notice. Before the two can continue tormenting one another with their accidental flirting, the room's door slides open. I knew I heard voices. Midori, you're awake. A familiar pincat hurls herself onto the boy's bed to hug him. Followed by a pointy-haired Reteed with a signature shark-toothed grin. Good to see you're up, Kirishima chuckles while helping Kyoka pry Mina off the poor bedridden boy. We were getting worried for a while there. Quick. I heard that eating your get-well flowers can make you feel better. Mina breaks loose to lunge at a vase full of tulips placed by Izuku's bedside. There's no stopping the pincat as she hysterically tries to force-feed the boy. Yes. I heard this too, a voice contrastingly calm compared to the room full of yelling turns everyone's attention to the doorway. Another fellow hero student stands there awkwardly, his heterochromic gaze not revealing much emotion. Todoroki, you too, Izuku cries out with both shock and despair. That's the only opportunity Mina needs to shove the tulips down his throat. He gags as the flowers get crammed into his open mouth and he's forced to swallow or suffocate. What is all this ruckus? Izuku's only saving grace is the arrival of Recovery Girl. The nurse wallops each of them on the head with her cane to stop the roughhousing. Don't you know bed rest is the most important thing for a patient? Rest. Get out if you're not going to contribute. Sorry, Midori. Mina rubs the throbbing spot on her head where she was whacked before retreating through the exit. Yeah, bro. Get better soon. Kirishima mirrors the girl that he came with before dragging Todoroki with him. Kyoka sighs as she collects her things to go with them. But Izuku stops her when he sees her grab her notebook. Remember. I want to hear that song when it's finished. She pauses, surprised that he's still so insistent. Then shakes her head. You'd have to be a magician to pull that off. Her soft chuckle makes the boy laugh along. Until, he chokes. Kyoka looks down at him, her face crunching up with concern as he coughs. She almost expects him to spit up blood again. But instead, something else comes out of his mouth. Landing right in the palm of his hand are the white petals of the tulips that he swallowed. Though covered with saliva from hacking them up, Izuku presents her with flowers. Tada. He flashes her a cheesy grin. That's it. His health and recovery girl be damned. Kyoka jabs him with her ear jacks, dummy. Chapter 29. It's a huddle as indiscriminately organized as the droplets descending from a lightless sky. Everyone adorns black attire, the dim day reflecting on their faces, despite the lack of sunbeams. Rain rolls off headstones while simultaneously pelting umbrellas. Slick grass sways with a boy's mutually green curls. A breeze stirs something up in him. The tremble of his hand that slides through his umbrella's handle is as loose as his posture. His breath shakes. Everything does. His whole world is shaken. Still shaking. Izuku had gotten so used to the warmth of Pochita's presence in his heart that the bitter bite of his mother's cold absence leaves him in an ever-constant agony. The Bakugos are present. Kaken, Katsuki, he catches his childhood frenemy's gaze every so often. A few of his mother's co-workers bow their heads to show their sympathy. Everyone at Izuku Midoriya's grave has some degree of condolences to give. Izuku takes none of them. He shudders when his mother's warm embrace is replaced by another chilling breeze. The air hugs him until he suffocates. It's difficult to breathe life into his lungs while standing in a place so devoid of any. Death occupies every headstone as far as the eye can see. Heaven or hell, he feels like the devil to have cheated what should have eventually been his fate too. He'd had time to cry. He'd had time to process her passing. Yet, he still wasn't prepared to see his mother lowered into the ground. Only after dirt covered her casket did her death seem permanent. Pochita never received a proper burial. To an extent, it is almost as though Pochita never left. Izuku raises a hand to his chest, feeling his heartbeat that's only possible because of the wonder dog. This is a funeral. This is someone leaving for good. Izuku realizes he'll never see his mom ever again. They'll never speak to one another in a fated reunion like he had with Pochita. She's gone. Forever. Izuku stays there despite that fact. Even after all the other attendees have left, he remains rooted to the ground akin to the tree that shadows him with darkened leaves. His eyes lift past the cemetery and take to the sky. Clouds blend with the moisture in the air, creating a sheet that covers any speck of light a star might make. The hand covering his heart stretches out towards it, reaching for a doorknob to heaven's door. Just when he feels like he might be able to open it by some chance or miracle, he hears the wet squelch of someone's shoes sinking into the mud of damp pastures. The boy settles his sights back down on the land. Across from him, he's shocked to see a familiar face from his class. Though the fellow hero in training's glasses are fogged, equally square-shaped eyes meet Izuku's. Ida. Izuku breathes out a gust of condensation that seemingly takes the rest of his breath away as he chokes on his next words. What are you doing here? Iida's lips stay set in a solid straight line as grim as his posture and demeanor. Instead of speaking, he slowly gestures with a thumb over his shoulder at another burial taking place. When Izuku notices a resemblance in the features of the attendants there with Iida's, he understands. Iida glances down at the headstone in between them, the comprehension of the other boy's presence mutual. Izuku's grip on his umbrella handle tightens. Then loosens. He closes the distance between them by taking the first steps. Away from his mother's resting place. Mind if I join you? Izuku meets his classmate's gaze again. Any light in their eyes have been dimmed, each stare reduced to a vacant expression. Yet, there's an unspoken communication. Iida gives his peer a solemn nod before gesturing in the direction of the funeral. Izuku joins his classmate for a second eulogy. This one is for the pro-hero Ingenium, Tensei Iida, Tenya's older brother. Tenya's sibling had been murdered during the sports festival, hence Tenya's strange behavior. Izuku had been so preoccupied with his own mess of issues that he failed to notice anything was wrong until now. The storm overhead continues to brew. Rain pours harder. It's a sad send-off. Can we not speak of this to the others? I'd rather my personal matters stay private. Iida fixes Izuku with a sidelong stare. Wind whips a spray of particles between them. Izuku returns the other boy's look. He holds the gaze before nodding. It's not something you really want to talk about with anybody. His eyelids lull, and he has to close them despite their eye contact breaking by doing so. I understand. Iida's stiff posture softens. Yes. I suppose you would. He takes that as an opportunity to remove and defog his glasses before putting them back on to look at Izuku more clearly. Thank you, Izuku hums in response before the horn of a waiting limo beckons for Iida. The boy turns, signaling to them to wait a while longer. Iida sighs as he gives pause to his parting words, and Midoriya. I'm sorry for your loss. Izuku shifts so that he's turned too, prepared to go the other way, back in the direction of his mother's headstone. Take care, Iida. Rain falls in a collective cascading flow that transfers into the movement of running water in the flooded terrain. It's become such a monsoon that Izuku doesn't bother with his umbrella anymore. Drenched head to toe as his shoes sink into the slush of muddy land, he moves forward. This way, nobody can tell the difference between the storm and his eyes. Flashes of anger illuminated by sparks of lightning within the well of tears stare ahead. He sways and stumbles but carries himself home. When Izuku reaches his house, he finds the front door already unlocked. He stands in the middle of the frame. A blue luminescence of the downpour behind him dimly lights the dark hallway that leads inside. There's a waft of something scented. A billow of steam warmer than the fog of the air outside. The tea that his mother keeps in the cabinets above the oven has been brewed. Izuku steps into the house and rounds the corner, not caring that he tracks filth along the carpeted floor. I let myself in. A woman sits with one leg crossed over the other, while clasping a cup of tea with each of her hands. She's not his mother. Her crimson-colored hair is braided and long, unlike his mom's emerald bun that she kept short. I hope you don't mind, the mysterious lady takes a sip from her drink as she gauges Izuku in response to his staring. After overcoming his initial stupor and surprise, Izuku instinctually reaches for the string attached to his sternum. Maybe I do, he growls as a warning to the stranger, while narrowing his eyes to glare. Relax, Mr. Midoriya, I'm from the Hero Public Safety Commission. The woman sets her cup down in order to procure a badge of proof. Izuku's already squinted eyes read the license and identify her as Director Makima, making them widen when he's finished. I'm not here to harm you. Though it is a good sign to see you're the type of person who's prepared to take action if need be. Izuku lets his hand fall away from the ripcord on his chest. Exasperated, his whole body slouches and he can't help but sigh. Sorry. You just happened to catch me on a bad day. The apology is just short of coming out as a groan, but he sees that the HPSC director is already nodding along as though she understands. Your mother, Makima has a stoic tone and expression more devoid of emotion than Iida had acted, but she still says what Izuku has come to expect from people lately. I'm sorry for your loss. Everybody is. He tries not to sound bitter about it by telling himself it's not her fault, not like you were the one that made me her sick. Makima tilts her head down, chin aimed towards the ground. From this angle, the subtle twitch of her mouth is lesser noticed. It's a small smile that doesn't involve much movement of the lips, but the uplift still contains the telltale facial shifts that indicate a similar expression. Then there's the look in her eyes that bore into Izuku's. Her stare throws the boy off balance, her gaze an optical illusion composed of glowing rings tunneling towards him like a hypnotic spiral. It's a straight drop into hell through every ring. Izuku breaks her hold by blinking before swallowing to find his voice within the dazed demeanor he's unfamiliar with. Care to tell me why you broke into my house unannounced? Makima gestures for him to sit and he does. After your performance at the sports festival, the HPSC thought it best to make a proposition. She reclaims her tea to resume taking small sips from it. An internship? Izuku asks. Not quite. Makima's smile is a tad more defined this time, but vanishes just as quickly. This is a long-term trainee program under similar pretenses, though her index finger taps the rim of her teacup as she thinks of a better way to phrase it. Think of it as job security. Izuku runs a hand through his hair, feeling how slick it's become from the rain. I'm sorry, it might just be because I've had a long day, but I don't really follow. His hand slides down to pinch some of his forehead. He's thinking. After the unfortunate passing of your mother, your place of residence and other provisions, such as payment for your curriculum, fall into question. The HPSC is fully prepared to provide you with the hospitality you require to continue your academic studies while pursuing an alternative path to your future as a hero. Makima elaborates further when she sees him having trouble with his thoughts on the matter. Oh, I don't know, but Izuku still stays skeptical. If I'm gonna graduate from UA, I don't think I'll have any troubles. He scratches his head as though any other idea to consider is just an annoying itch. Besides, my father has been providing financially despite working overseas. When Izuku looks back in the direction of Makima, he sees that she's not stopped staring at him. I see, she finishes her cup of tea while still maintaining the hold. It's like the woman swallowed all of the room's warmth when a shiver runs up the boy's spine. Then, Makima leans forward. Her tone becomes hushed as she asks, have you considered a course of action should something happen to him? Precipitation excretes fog from Izuku's mouth as he breathes out. Huh. The boy's blood runs cold. You've already lost one parent, Makima says it matter-of-factly. She may as well. It is a fact. What she says next, however, is spoken just as casually. It's not out of the realm of possibility to lose another. Izuku's teeth clack together, he stops them from chattering as his skin is nipped by a chilling sensation. His hair prickles, standing on end. What are you trying to say? He leans forward to match Makima's position, but his height keeps him bent lower than her. Looking up at her, he can imagine a false halo above her angelic face, the sinister stare he can't help but be drawn into belonging to that of a true devil's nature. As I stated earlier, my organization can provide you with all your needs, including medical compensation for your remaining family. She props her elbows on her knees to make a sturdy hand table for her chin to rest on, while presenting him with the same deal that she tried to strike before. He half expects the woman to hand him a pen to sign a contract with. Medical compensation. Izuku leans back enough to straighten his posture as he blinks back his disbelief. The attempt at blackmail aside, he feels rage well up inside of him. Where was your medical compensation when I needed you for my mother's treatment? He forces himself to his feet so that he stands over her. My father's fine, Izuku snaps at the woman so angrily that his teeth gnash together and saliva flies out of his mouth. My mom's not. Had she come to him sooner with this proposition, it just may have worked. He'd have jumped at the opportunity to provide for his mom. To save her. You're too late, but that chance is gone, and so the offer isn't worth considering to him. His frown flinches as his fury fades into sorrow. It really was a bad day for the HPSC director to approach him with this. Makima raises her head with a hum, bringing Izuku's attention back to her. She unfolds her arms first. Then uncrosses her legs. That's a shame, the boy takes a step back when she suddenly stands up. Even without heels, she's taller than him. A moment of silence passes. The only sound filling the room is the ambience of the harsh storm that pounds to be let in. Izuku can't help but back away another step when Makima makes a move to reach behind her. When he sees that she's only grabbing her overcoat from the headrest of the couch, he allows himself to relax only the slightest bit. She slides her arms into the sleeves before pulling something out of the coat's left pocket. The offer still stands should you change your mind. Izuku takes a second to realize she's offering him her business card. The boy nods and takes it, at least as a sign of respect. His fingers brush against something attached to the back of the small white rectangle. Startled, Izuku nearly drops the card. When he flips it over, however, he sees that it's simply a Chupa Chups lollipop. It's a shade of red close to brown. Cola flavored. Izuku glances back up to see Makima not trying to hide her smile this time. He swallows, somehow already tasting the soda flavor in his mouth despite how dry it is. Appreciate the sentiment, he shoves the lollipop into his own pocket before stepping aside so that she can leave. After the HPSC director exits, Izuku returns to the couch where he collapses. He suddenly feels exhausted. A majority of the conversations he's had today have been draining, but that one had been the worst by far. He's about to close his eyes so that he can just sleep it off when he notices the collection of papers on the coffee table in front of him. UA's logo is stamped at the top of each page. He forces back a yawn by turning it into a sigh. Even though Izawa had given him the day off to mourn and tend to his mother's funeral, he's still got the day's worth of coursework to do. Izuku sifts through them, seeing that his assignment pertains to internship requests he received after his performance at the sports festival. Seeing some of the offers that he received from pro heroes he idolized during his childhood, he feels more content with his decision to deny Makima's offer. One of the names piques his interest in particular. He digs his hand into his pocket, hoping to have a pencil on him. Instead, he finds the lollipop. He shrugs. May as well. The candy is a treat worth having to celebrate. Izuku slides the Chupa Chup into his mouth as he grabs a pen from his other pocket to circle his chosen internship offer. The squiggly oval wraps around Izuku's selected agency, Kigo Takami, the number 2 hero known as Hawks. Chapter 30. Feet cross a concrete landing without ever treading over the yellow paint line that separates them from crumpled ticket stubs and food wrappers, spotting a gravel rail bed. Other pairs of legs pass by in the other direction, following map routes that post the train schedule on nearly every wall. Constant motion carries a flow of people throughout the station, men and women walking up or down escalators to pass through turnstiles. Red sneakers scrape to a sudden halt, followed by the collective shoe scratches of others. Class 1A gathers at a track with their teacher, standing to the side where commuting pedestrians won't be obstructed by their crowded presence. You've all brought your costumes, I see. Good. Don't drop or leave them behind when you get on and off your trains. Aizawa looks over the group of teens to perform a mental headcount. Izuku's grip on the handle of his UA uniform's briefcase tightens. When Aizawa sees his entire class is present and accounted for, he allows himself to close his tired and dry eyes for a second of rest. He absent-mindedly scratches at the stitches sewing his left cheek together before reopening his eyes. I expect all of you to be on your best behavior. Now get going. A commotion of conversation breaks out amongst the group as they begin to split off in duos and trios. You headed to Kyushu? I think it's that way, as Shido pairs off with Uraraka. Shiro says something to Kaminari while they walk in the other direction. Only a few remain with Aizawa on that particular platform once everyone takes their respective paths. Hiroshima, Bakugo, and Jiro idle with Izuku while they wait for their train. Jiro toys with an ear jack, twisting it on one of her fingers. Izuku glances in her direction, catching her returning the stare. They each look away as quickly as their eyes met, blushing. So, have you decided on a hero name yet? The girl shyly tries to salvage the situation before it can turn awkward. Not yet, Izuku chuckles, but the humor fades as he responds, I've been a little too distracted to come up with anything. He forces down an instinctive wince when he realizes he made things uncomfortable again. Wanting to prevent a weird silence, he asks, any suggestions? Before Jiro can get out a response, Kirishima suddenly wraps his arm around Izuku's shoulders, pulling him in close for a side hug. How about taking a page from Bakubro's book and calling yourself Lord Chainsaw? He flashes his patented shark-tooth grin that seems more aimed towards Bakubro than Izuku. Izuku exchanges a look with his childhood friend, raising an eyebrow. TCH, but the blonde rolls his eyes in response before closing them to avoid having to elaborate, don't go copying me. I doubt that's the last thing he'd want to do. Jiru's deadpan response doesn't let the blonde disregard them for too long though. Boy, Bakugo's eyes snap back open as he turns to face them. He opens his mouth, ready to retort, but stops when he makes eye contact with Izuku. There's a strange exchange of brief staring that takes Izuku by surprise. Even more startling to him is when Bakugo scoffs, only saying, whatever, before letting it go. Izuku clears his throat, recovering from the odd exchange. I'll probably just go with something simple, like, I dunno. Chainsaw Man. He shrugs as he throws out the first idea that comes to him. Hiroshima jerks Izuku with his recoil, still not unlatching his arm from the other boy's shoulders. That's it. Not to be a hater, but that's kinda basic. The fanged Redeed's pointed grin falters, but remains intact to stay polite as he shares his opinion on the name. Jiro comes to Izuku's rescue, prying Kirishima off him in order to separate the two and share her own thoughts. Maybe, but it still sounds hardcore. She steps in between them to also prevent potential future invasion of space. Linking back his shock, Izuku has to do a double take. You really like it? Hearing him sound so hopeful, Jiro smirks, unable to help herself from teasing him. It's not that metal, but someone had to back you up. Heaven knows Bakugo wasn't going to. She feels proud of herself when she's able to simultaneously take another shot at the explosive member of the bunch. But Bakugo doesn't restrain himself from firing back this time. You're one to talk, ears. It's his turn to smirk as he points out, earphone jack isn't all that original either. Boy, Jiro's smile shifts to a scowl. Izuku has to place himself in her path to Bakugo when he catches her glowering at the blonde. Before things can escalate to the next level, a new voice chimes in. Don't tell me I just walked into an argument. All heads turn to see who. Much to the group's surprise, Hitachi Shinso approaches them. It's too early in the morning for that. He appears as he had on the day of the sports festival. Eye bags compliment his bedhead as he cracks open a coffee can. Shinso? Izuku can't contain his shock when he recognizes the boy he had fought. You're late. The only person who doesn't show a shred of surprise is Aizawa. The teacher appears as tired as the newcomer, their resemblance uncanny when they stand side by side. Shinso takes a sip of his coffee before his excuse comes out as a low drawl, I made a stop at the vending machine. Bakugo flicks his gaze from person to person, patience growing thin as he waits for them to ask the question that's bugging him. When they don't, he growls and explodes, what the hell is Minfic doing here? Language, Aizawa fixes his student with a stern look before answering, after Shinso's performance in the sports festival and Minetta's withdrawal from the class, it was only rational for me to consider him for the hero course. Dude. Congrats on getting in. Kirishima moves forward in an effort to wrap the boy in a celebratory hug. But Shinso sidesteps the attempt in order to dodge it effectively, save it for after I've proven myself. He watches as Kirishima stumbles past him. Shinso's right, Aizawa nods, he's not been fully accepted just yet. The explanation that follows makes Kirishima pick himself up. Rather, while you're all away during internships, I'll be evaluating Shinso myself to see if he should be allowed in. That's still good news for you, Shinso, I have no doubt you'll manage. Izuku flashes the boy an encouraging smile which Kirishima and Jiro reciprocate with an additional thumbs up. Shinso looks away, thanks. I guess, his voice quiet as he shyly smiles softly. Wow, but an internship with Aizawa-sensei, I don't envy him. Jiro nudges Izuku as she whispers to him and the others within proximity. Kirishima winces before nodding while Izuku feels a twinge of sympathy as well. They jump when Aizawa raises his voice, quit chattering and pay attention to your surroundings. They think they're caught before realizing he only did so because of the rise in reverberation of screeching steel on steel. The train is arriving, he gestures with his head in the direction of the tunnel, that's slowly turning from dark to dim. The wheels grinding the track stop their electrified spin. Everyone steps back, staying behind the yellow painted line until the train glides to a full stop. When the connected cars open each of their doors, the passengers swap from inside and outside. Immediately, seats are filled and spots are taken. Aizawa and Shinso go to the back of the car where they stand off to the side. Bakugo steals an open seat, simultaneously claiming the one next to him for Kirishima to sit. The Redeed chuckles as he apologetically shrugs, sorry guys, but you snooze you lose, leaving Jiro and Izuku to fend for themselves. The duo move to the other side of the car where one chair is available. Why, you can have the seat if you want, Izuku offers it to Jiro with a sheepish step back. Oh, thanks, but it's fine, Jiro waves her hands while stammering, you take it. Ah, but I insist. Izuku frantically shakes his head while returning the gesture. Bakugo watches the exchange from the sidelines, rolling his eyes at their antics. He huffs before grumbling his suggestion, why don't you just have her sit in your lap? Izuku's eyes nearly pop out of their sockets. I'll stand. He blurts out an instant response despite his voice squeaking. Jiro would have probably reacted the same way had he not done so first. Rather, she pouts instead. You turn down Bakugo's suggestion a little hastily there, her arms fold across her chest as she fixes Izuku with a sassy stare, the thought of sharing with me really that bad? Izuku's head nearly flies off when it swivels to look at the girl in shock. What? No. He gets whiplash when he does it a second time. I mean the boy searches the enclosed car for someone to save him as he begins to panic. Do you not like me? Am I not attractive enough for you? But Jiro's jacks raised menacingly with the aura an angry woman radiates, makes everybody just as cowardice. Izuku stumbles over himself as much as he does his words, no. I mean, yes, I do. I find you very attractive. But finally finds his feeling when he lands on his answer. Izuku and Jiro both realize what he's said and blush. All the tension in the air evaporates, both of them avoiding looking at the other. The moment stretches rather than passes. Eventually, Izuku forces himself to mumble, fine. You can sit on my lap. He sits down, still directing his gaze to be far off from Jiro. When the moment continues to elongate, he can't help himself, he looks sidelong to see if the girl will actually commit. Jiro covers her face, unable to hide her intense blush. Her cheeks are hot in her hands, nowhere close to cooling off. Nevertheless, she slowly lowers her back end to sit down. Izuku and her tense up when her ass makes contact with his lap. It doesn't help that they both nervously fidget, the movement below making them all the more aware of their touch. Bakugo grins, satisfied to watch their squirming. That is, until Kirishima nudges him. Smooth. But why didn't you use that same Riz technique on me? He leans in close until he invades the blonde's personal space. Bakugo drives a palm into Kirishima's face, giving the Redeed a shove and driving him back. Shut the fuck up, shitty hair. He huffs and puffs as he restrains himself from showing too much emotion. I only helped the nerd out cause I owed him one for all the trouble I caused. Suddenly, the train's brake unlatches and the car shifts with a jolt. Jiro is jerked back, forcing Izuku to wrap his arms around her. Once he catches her in order to prevent her from falling, the train starts moving forward. It's then he realizes the position that they're in. Sorry. But Jiro grabs his arms before they can move away. She brings them back around her waist. Wrapped in a strange hug, they each continue to blush over their close proximity. But, Jiro speaks for them both when she says, it's fine. Chapter 31. Anxious, Izuku tugs at the collar of the tie taut around his neck. It's been roughly 3 hours since Hawks ordered him up to the roof of the hero's agency. Yet, as the boy glances about, the man is nowhere to be seen. Izuku refrains from sighing in exasperation as he approaches the building's ledge. More times than he can count on two hands, he's already paced from one side to the other. This time is no different, he sees nothing different from the brightly sunlit city below that beckons him for a patrol yet to come. He hadn't met the hero responsible for his tutelage yet. Upon arrival, he only worked with other interns to settle into his temporary residence at the agency. As time continues to wane, Izuku can't help but become impatient. He shuffles his feet as he fidgets in place. The basic uniform that makes up his hero suit makes him aware of how hot the day is. He's already rolled his sleeves up to his elbows, but that's hardly enough to alleviate anything. Only the occasional breeze of wind that ruffles his unruly green curls of hair serve as a saving grace. The next wave of air that rolls through carries something tangible. Izuku squints to see what. Riding the wave, like a surfboard, is a single red feather. His eyes widen as he reaches out with a hand to catch it, his fingers plucking the quill from the sky. The sun radiates off the crimson color, reflecting upwards. Izuku tilts his head up to see several more plumage floating from the heavens in a golden glow. With a wingspan responsible for the discarded feathers, Hawks isn't far behind as he glides down to land himself across from Izuku. Hawks uses one hand to remove his eye visor, while using the other to slick back the strands of blonde hair hanging over his forehead. Took you long enough, a smirk etches its way across his face when he sees Izuku still in awe. But that stupor quickly shifts to a new state of shock. Me? Izuku incredulously points at himself. Hawks nods, the smile on his lips parting to flash pearly white teeth. I was starting to grow restless, his wings rustle behind him, as though they're displaying some sort of emphasis. Izuku recoils, doing a double take. I was the one waiting for 3 hours. The boy gestures wildly with his arms to the area around him, as though that'll prove his point. It doesn't. Hawks raises a brow, you were. Why? His head tilting with emotion. Didn't you think to look up once during that whole wait? Izuku stares, his mouth agape. You mean, his jaw closes and shuts like a broken hinge until he slaps his cheeks to fix it, you were watching me that whole time. Hawk switches from one eyebrow to the other, you didn't know. His head shifting to that opposite side as well. He sighs while rubbing the back of his neck. Boy, we've got more to work on than I imagined. Izuku leans forward, prepared to say something, but stops short. It's a fair point. Had Hawks been a villain or an assassin of some sort, he would have been taken out without ever realizing what happened. Embarrassed, Izuku lowers his head. Sorry for doubting you, he reverts to his usually bashful demeanor when he realizes his outburst was out of line. Hawks laughs, waving it off. Don't sweat it, kid. I'm sorry for expecting more, his smirk continues to upgrade and next becomes a grin. That's somehow a lot worse, but Izuku isn't quite as amused. His shoulders slump as he sulks. Hawks begins backing himself towards the building's ledge. Either way, we've already wasted enough time. Wouldn't you say? Izuku looks up, surprised, but nods. No time like the present to get things moving, and I mean that quite literally. Hawks claps his hands together as his wings spread themselves out. Think you can keep up? But Izuku doesn't get the chance to reply. Follow me, kid. Hawks falls backwards as he slides his eye visor back over his face. Then, the hero takes flight. Izuku only has enough time to run up to the ledge from which Hawks used as a launch pad before seeing the man's increasingly receding back. Wait, how? Izuku cups his hands around his mouth as he cries out, I can't fly. But Hawks doesn't slow the beat of his wings, each flap carrying him further and further away. Izuku exhales more than gasps, realizing that he'll be left behind at this rate. He slides a finger through one of the gaps between the buttons of his dress shirt, finding the pull string that dangles from his sternum. One tug is all it takes. With a motion of yanking it forwards, he thrusts his body off the roof. Chainsaws lacerate tendons, the metallic odor of blood giving way to the stench of burning gas. Revving themselves up as they arch down, Izuku's arm bars split his forearms in half. His motorized mouth cackles as an elongated tongue slips out to flap in the wind. The chainsaw protruding from his forehead slashes at the air when he bends his body back with the full force of the freefall he's thrown himself into. It takes a little improv every now and then to discover new prospects to one's quirk. What he comes up with at that particular moment is a way to slow his descent while maximizing the potential of using his falling as a flow to move faster. Izuku swings an arm back so that the chainsaw protruding from it can catch the wall behind him. He feels restrictive force, a pullback, but the teethed limb doesn't dig deep enough into the building to stop him. Izuku cranes, leans, and then switches arms. The drag force carries his weight down still, but at a pace more refined to his own control. Then, as though pushing himself down a slope, Izuku uses both to carry himself from that building side to the next. A cool breeze brushes past him, and he glides along the wall thanks to his chainsaws as a grip. In a strange sense, Izuku begins using his quirk as a means to ski and terrain the city. Hawks glances back when he hears the velocity of which the chainsaws rev and roar. Izuku carries himself with an extreme exertion as he tests his new means of mobility. The hero hums as he gauges the boy's movement. It's not enough to catch up, certainly not if Hawks were to actually put in some effort to his speed. However, it is enough to follow along that he doesn't completely get left behind. Hawks looks away with a mirthless smile on his face. At this rate, he may be able to get through the internship with little to no concern after all. Makima may be displeased with both he and the boy's performance results, but it can't be helped. Besides, he'd heard firsthand that Izuku wasn't interested anyways. That makes his smile a little less mirthless. Behind the chainsaws, a flurry of debris dust trails along. Izuku weaves to maintain balance on the sideways surface, alternating between his left and right arm bars. It takes a tremendous amount of effort, coupled with just as much concentration. Especially when the time comes to move from one building to the next. It's equal part velocity and equal part traction, but he's not a mathematician. The chains tread deep, grinding a groove into the walls he uses as his means of movement. Hawk suddenly swoops down, a direct dive. Izuku blinks, the hero completely gone out of sight when his gaslit orbs rekindle. Izuku digs the chainsaw he's using as a crutch deeper into the wall he's sliding across. He comes to an abrupt stop. The chainsaw mounted atop his head whirs when he tilts his chin down to look at the streets below. There, he spots the red blur of Hawk's wings as the hero stops a purse snatcher. Izuku pulls back on the chainsaw that he's using to stay mounted. He'd been so focused on his means of mobility and keeping up with the hero that he hadn't noticed his surroundings. By the time the intern drops down onto the sidewalk, Hawks is already airborne again. Hawks pauses to salute Izuku with 2 fingers before soaring into the sky. Izuku takes a step, prepared to follow, but then realizes what the sign was meant to indicate. He glances about. An elderly lady clutches her purse tightly, while a masked fellow groans from their place lying on the pavement. He's been left to deal with the aftermath of the hero's efforts. Like a sidekick, he's on cleanup duty. Izuku grumbles and groans, but stays behind to take care of the situation. There's the matter of binding the caught criminal in capture tape, comforting the victim, and waiting for the police to arrive. It's grunt work, but it's part of the job. Fortunately for Izuku, Hawks happens to circle back around on his patrol route and he's able to jump back in. Izuku climbs the walls of buildings again, re-familiarizing himself with his newfound means of transportation. It's another challenge of trying to keep up. However, that only lasts for a short period of time before Hawks thwarts another crime, and Izuku is left to deal with the collateral damage once more. Next stop is the cantina on Sakamoto Drive, where they've got a customer going wild. Catch up after you handle the rest here, Hawks waves another farewell as his feet lift off the ground. Izuku huffs and puffs, breathing heavily as he tries to recover from his constant pursuit of the hero. Wait. He barely manages to call out to the increasingly familiar side of Hawk's back. Not that his shout does any good. Can't stand around yapping while the next crisis is getting worse, Hawks yells back before he's one with the wind. This continues to happen. Each and every time. Izuku arrives late to the scene, Hawks already having finished the job on his own. As the sun settles, so does the thrumming of the chainsaw boy's engine. The jagged links slow their spin until they stop. His pointed teeth have become as dull as his movements. Izuku falls to his knees, giving out. Hawks watches from a bird-eye view, satisfied with the day's results. Chapter 32. Waves laced with flora wrap themselves around the pillars of the pier. Salty brine filters into the oceanic air, that strong scent wafting with every gust of wind. The boards beneath Izuku's feet creak under his weight. The planks are uneven, mismatched even, aged cypress and dull red cedar create the docking. Golden sunbeams shine down on the harbor, illuminating the boats anchored there. Each ship rocks in the water, swaying with the loose foundation of the quay. Another breeze passes through, ruffling the plain t-shirt Izuku's wearing as much as the wind tousles his hair. He's grateful Hawks requested that he dress down today, leading him to abandon his hero uniform for a pair of tan cargo shorts and something lighter. Sweat drips from his brow followed by his chin, the droplets hitting the already damp flooring. The heat of the beach creates a glare on the bay that forces Izuku to squint. Yet, it's still difficult for him to see the purpose of meeting here today instead of in the city like last time. Twiddling his toes in a pair of flip-flops, feet floating between the dock and the water, hovers Hawks. He plucks a cherry red popsicle from his mouth with a pop before smiling and waving with it upon noticing his intern's arrival. Instantly, Izuku notes the hero's attire is also more leisurely, a beach shirt covered in peacock printing and Bermuda shorts flap in the wind with his wings. Yo, Hawks greets Izuku before gracefully landing and putting his popsicle back into his mouth, NRRC Dre, HRRH. Izuku stops short, cocking his head with confusion in his face. He glances left and right before flicking his gaze back to the man in front of him. What? He asks. Hawks bites off a chunk of his popsicle to suck on the flavored ice before sliding the rest out of his mouth in order to speak more clearly. He repeats himself, nice day. Oh, Izuku nods, yeah. He looks around the pier again, as though he missed something the first time. I hope you don't mind me asking, the back of his head suddenly itches and he can't help but scratch it, but why exactly are we here? Good question, Hawks gestures towards Izuku with his half-eaten popsicle, I don't mind it at all before taking another bite off. I've been thinking. He swallows, what's the point of taking you on patrol with me if you're only going to slow me down, you know? Izuku reciprocates swallowing, though his is dry. He pats the pant legs of his shorts, trying to dry off his hands that have become as sweaty as the rest of him. So I called in a favor for today, Hawks flourishes and waves his popsicle, while stepping aside to present a particular boat docked behind him. I thought it'd be a good change of pace to have you try another mode of transportation. Scrawled in bright painted kanji, Izuku reads the Oki Mariner. The 65-foot vessel resembles a cutter with a crew of sailors already on board. Izuku's eyes widen. Among the group is a girl that he recognizes from class. Garbed in a lime green turtleneck wetsuit, a greenette with equally big eyes, hops from the boat's deck onto the railing. She croaks like a frog with equal surprise evident in her otherwise expressionless face, Midoriya. Izuku has to do a double take, his brain clocking overtime to register the coupled amounts of shock. Asui. He blinks back his surprise when she leaps down from the boat onto the dock. Call me Tsayu, the fellow greenie holds up one of her fingers to correct him. Izuku notices how unnaturally big her hands are when that same finger moves to rest curiously on her chin. What are you doing here? The girl ribbits. I think I can answer that. Everyone diverts their attention to the direction of another feminine voice. A voice that belongs to a woman sporting a sleeveless sailor uniform, blue hair and blue fins drawing focus to her face. I'm serious, she introduces herself first and foremost before joining them and explaining, and Hawks here spoke to the captain, and it's been decided that we got room for one more on the ship. Izuku meets his gaze with Asui's again before clearing his throat and addressing Sirius, with all due respect. My internship is with Hawks and not you. He moves to cross his arms over his chest, but opts for setting his hands on his hips instead. I can't just be passed off to somebody else. Hawks finishes his popsicle before flicking the stick away, it's just for one day, Kid's shoulders roll with a shrug, try not to take it too personally. Now, Izuku crosses his arms. It's kinda hard not to when the reason is because I hold you back, he grumbles his frustrations loud enough to be heard over the waves hitting the harbor. Sirius glances between the hero and his intern before chiming back in, this isn't a cruise ship, you know. She gestures with a thumb over her shoulder to point out the crew working to set sail, try not to hold us back either. The whole purpose of this exercise is to help you. Hawks moves closer to speak with Izuku, while taking on a more serious expression and tone. You're too reliant on the landscape of the city to think of anything outside the box. He taps the side of his head with his fingers for emphasis, before pointing out at the sea with them. I can fly over open water while you with your chainsaws would just sputter out the hero, then rests a hand on the boy's shoulder. The aim of this isn't to pass you off to be somebody else's problem, but to help you stretch your wings, giving it a good squeeze. Izuku stares out at the vast ocean, suddenly understanding what Hawks means. I see, he turns back to address Sirius with an apologetic bow, I didn't mean any disrespect. None taken, she waves it off. Water under the bridge or dock, in this case, which Hawks does as well. He flaps his wings to lift off. Good luck, kid, I expect you to have learned something by the time I come back to pick you up, and then he's gone. Come on, Sirius gestures with her finned head for Izuku to follow, let's introduce you to the captain. I'm surprised heroes can do this. Asui uses her trademark thinking finger to scratch the top of her head, though I guess I'm not complaining. It's nice to see a familiar face. Izuku nods in agreement, the feeling mutual. It was a little nerve-wracking being on my own for the first night. He steps up from the dock onto the Oki Mariner. Asui follows after him, though she adds a little more spring to her step. Did you have trouble sleeping too? Ah. Not really, Izuku lets out a resigned chuckle as he places a hand over his chest. I got used to sleeping without my dog after a while. I know what you mean, Asui's response makes Izuku glance over at her. She notices and elaborates, I have a bunch of younger siblings that I used to share a room with. Izuku hums, mulling that over. To suddenly have an absence of family, it's a feeling he's all too familiar with. Now more than ever after losing his mother. You must miss them, he tries not to sound too somber as he offers her some form of empathy. But their conversation gets disrupted when the ship shifts under the heavy-weighted stomps of a muscular man's boots. Sporting a wetsuit like Asui, though blue and not as compact, is a humanoid spotted seal. Yellow goggles rest atop his head, and gray whiskers hang from his chin to make a beard. Well, what do we have here? He towers over the hero student so much so that his shadow completely blocks out the sun, a scalawag looking to join my crew. Captain Selkie. Sirius salutes before she gestures towards Izuku in order to introduce him. This is our intensive intern for the day. Izuku Midoriya. Oh ho. Hawks told me about this one. Selkie leans down to get a closer look at the latest member of his crew. You're not what I was expecting, but welcome aboard. Izuku raises an eyebrow before shrugging the comment off and bowing respectfully anyways. I'm not sure what you were expecting, but I'll try to live up to those expectations. No doubt in my mind that you will, the captain stands back up. Then Selkie nods, satisfied. Prepare to set sail. We've got a rendezvous with the Coast Guard and there's no room for slackers around here. Sir, yes sir. Sirius gives another salute. When she sees the two interns aren't performing the same action, she gives each of them a nudge. They follow along when they realize their mistake. I'll whip these two into shape in no time. She starts by handing each of them a mop to swab the deck. It seems like boring work to pass the time, hardly anything that'll amount to real progression with helping either one improve towards becoming a hero, but it at least gives Izuku some time to contemplate what Hawks had told him. It's true. He'd been too focused on how to utilize his environment within the city that he hadn't considered what he would do should he be placed in a different setting. He'd been subconsciously holding himself back. And by doing so, he also held back Hawks. Izuku's grip on the mop handle tightens when he thinks about how ignorant he was being. It's true, out on the open water he'll be forced to rethink his methods of movement. There's no sturdy structure or surface for him to glide on with his chainsaws. He contemplates water skiing, but gives up on the comparison when considering the stark contrast between using concrete and liquid as a means to skate. The steel of his chainsaws are too heavy. They'll weigh him down. His movements will be more restricted than freed. To go quirkless though, that's no better. He surely wouldn't be able to swim at a pace as fast as Hawks or a boat. Izuku frowns. He's stumped for the time being. Why the long face? Cleaning duty is too boring for you? Sirius snaps him out of his internal musings by invading his personal space. He reels back as she cranes her neck forward, their foreheads nearly knocking together. No. I mean, a little but no, Izuku stumbles with both his footing and his words as he tries to recover. He blushes, embarrassed. I was just thinking is all. Well, let's see your days off when you're busy unfastening the ropes. Sirius snaps her fingers and motions for him to get on the left side of the ship. Izuku does as he's ordered, spotting Asui across the way and handling the right side. 1, 2. 1, 2. Her chance to get them synchronized soon has them flowing properly. The ropes catch and slide through Izuku's hands, making him hiss. Nevertheless, he sees how much control the lines have over the ship's steering and sense of direction. The boat departs from the harbor with a swift turn. There we go, Izuku winces and grunts as he pulls in sync with the others. The thin wires are given power through his arms as they flex to maintain a firm foundation. Now that's what I call teamwork. Sirius claps him and Asui on the back once they manage to pull off the task. Are you okay, Midoriya? Asui takes note of Izuku closing and clenching his hands. She takes them in hers to inspect, concerned when she sees rope burns. It's nothing, Izuku tries pulling his hands away, but she doesn't let him go so easily. Really, I'm fine. Sirius notices next and steps closer to see for herself. We should get you bandaged, she tsks when she sees the injury. I'm telling you, it's fine, Izuku sighs but relents and allows them to tend to his wound anyways. If any of my little brothers tried to hide their scraped knees, I'd be upset, so don't go trying to undermine yourself when you're hurt, Asui scolds him as his hands are wrapped with gauze by Sirius. The sight of a greenette concern for his well-being reminds him of his mother. Unable to work up an argument, he nods. Selkie steps out of the ship's control room, joining them on the deck. He carries with him a portable radio, the comm switched off as he addresses his crew. Just got off the line with the Coast Guard. There was a tip that the Nisan trade ship had a couple of stowaways. He informs them of the situation they're sailing towards. Sirius finishes tending to Izuku, tightening the bandages wrapped around his hands. Then she shifts to ask, and? The Coast Guard inspected the Nisan, but the stowaways were nowhere to be found. Selkie pauses to scratch his beard before adding, however they did find cargo missing from the ship's freight list. I see, the fins on either side of Sirius's face flap when she frowns. Do either of you interns know what this means? Asui answers first, the stowaways moved the cargo to another ship before the Coast Guard arrived. That's correct, Selkie nods in approval. The stowaways were more than likely smuggling brokers. He spits his disgust out and over the side of the ship. They got away? Izuku asks. Not quite, Sirius waves for them to follow her into the control room. We can search the surrounding area with radar, and points towards the console where a sonar system runs. Exactly, Selkie gives her a thumbs up before addressing the interns, and while you monitor that, I'll take a more direct approach in the ocean, thanks to my quirk. Aye aye sir. The three crewmates salute their captain before he departs by diving over the railing of the boat. When he does, Izuku rushes to the handlebars to peer over and catch a glimpse of the hero's shadowy form darting through the water like a torpedo. Selkie is in his element, capable of using the ocean as a way to enhance his means of transportation. Izuku can't help but wonder what the hero does on land though. He thinks to ask Selkie when the man returns. In the meantime, he returns to the control room to monitor the radar. Or so that's what he expects to do. Sirius switches the sonar off before flicking a few more switches. The boat's motor fizzles out and the ship comes to a standstill as though anchored. What's going on? He asks the woman as she taps a few keys on the control panel to disable the radio next. If you're tired of all the work the captain and I have been putting you through, then I've got some good news. Sirius pivots to flash him a grin and a peace sign. We can relax for the rest of the day now. Ribbit. Asui is just as dumbfounded as her fellow intern. Captain Selkie should be able to handle the search himself. The odds of us finding anything stationed here are slim to none. He left us to keep us out of trouble in actuality. Sirius waves off their concern as she steps out of the control room. Izuku falters before chasing after her through and out the doorway, but when he steps outside, he nearly trips over himself. He doesn't expect to see Sirius bending over as she slides her sailor skirt down her thighs to her knees. His eyes catch a glimpse of white and cerulean striped buttocks before he turns away. What are you doing? His voice comes out a shrill squeak of a scream as he flushes red. Going for a swim, Sirius replies with a muffled voice as she slides the top part of her uniform over her head to unveil a frilly bandeau. Izuku peeks from the corner of his peripheral vision to see the striped panties from earlier were actually just the bottom half of a two-piece bikini. Seriously? His jaw nearly hits the deck. He makes the mistake of looking at Sirius fully now. There's a rise to her breasts as she arches her back to relinquish herself of the stuffy top she'd worn prior. Her long legs turn her around as she discards the shirt with a careless tiny toss. A rear end laced with the stripes of her bikini bottom stretches out as she bends the other way in order to dive over the ship. The splash of water as she disappears from view isn't enough to fully snap him out of his trance. You can pick your mouth up off the floor now, Midoriya. It's only when he hears Asui that he comes close. He blushes ferociously, prepared to apologetically face her. Except, his jaw unlatches a second time. He gets a full view of his classmate in her own bathing suit. This one also striped, albeit lemon yellow and lime green, clings to her body tighter than her wetsuit did. Her thighs are thicker than Sirius's were, the bottom of her bikini trimming them in a way that shows how plump her ass is as she stands to the side. She looks over her shoulder where a strap hangs loose, her boobs still propped but not as tightly. You too? Izuku manages to find his voice, but it's still a shrill shriek that he's not proud of. He's not proud of himself in any way for that matter currently. He finds that his body won't allow him to move. He can't raise his arms to cover his eyes, nor can he twist to turn away. Asui glances down at herself, taking note of the loose strap, but doesn't fix it. That only draws his gaze even more. The girl ribbits as she heads to where Sirius dove off. Her diving stance compared to the woman's accentuates her ass in a much more provocative way. A squat position reminiscent to that of a frog somehow expands the width of her backside even further. "I didn't take you for such a prude," she leaves him with a parting shot before joining Sirius in the sea. Izuku groans, leaning against the frame of the control room's doorway to use as a crutch. It takes a moment for him to cool off, his body hot and bothered not just by the sun anymore. He feels a warm liquid trickling down his lip and wipes it away with the back of his hand. He nearly chokes on his own saliva when he sees blood and not sweat smeared on his dorsal side. Izuku groans again, realizing he had a nosebleed. He pulls his shirt off to use as a rag, holding it to his nose. After a few dabs, his white tee is spotted with red stains. It's a punishment that he's deserving of, he figures. Izuku tosses it into the pile of other discarded clothing. It's at least refreshing to let his bare chest breathe a bit. He even contemplates cooling off further by joining the girls in the water. But decides against it. He sits on the edge of the ship, letting his legs dangle over. He stares out at the open water. The vast ocean met by the horizon glistens under the sun. He partly gasps and partly exhales, amazed by how the sky reflects in the sea. Each as blue as they are clear, he can find himself staring deeply into the endless expanse forever. So he closes his eyes. He feels the warmth of the sun beating down on him, coupled with the soothing touch of a cold but gentle breeze. He listens to the seagulls flying overhead and chuckles when he can't help but think of hawks when hearing a bird. Izuku relaxes, feeling the slow sway of the ship. The palpitating pulse of the sea is as steady as the ocean's current. Izuku knows that if Jiro could hear the waves, she would find it tranquil. Reminding himself of her brings a smile to his face. He briefly wonders how her internship is going. He wonders if it's anything like his. And if so, he ultimately would wonder what she looks like in a bikini compared to Asui and Sirius. Izuku shakes his head, trying to clear out those thoughts. When his brain threatens to conjure up imaginary images of what Jiro in a bikini might look like, he opens his eyes to look at the ocean again instead. Extended combers of water curling into arched formations bring ripples to the brim of the boat. Izuku tracks the swelling froth out to sea where he spots the source of disruption. A smaller vessel than the one he's on catches waves as it travels through the tide. He's on his feet in an instant. Considering the odds of a registered ship coincidentally entering their space as they try to track down pirates are slim to none, Izuku hurries back towards the control room. As he does, he shouts over the railing to his disported crewmates, "Sai. Sirius. I spotted something. Hurry back up." The pair of binoculars hang from a hook by the doorway. Izuku snatches them while flicking the switches that Sirius had hit earlier. The ship sputters back to life as its systems return to being online. The radar makes a noise when a blip enters its echolocation radius. The unidentified watercraft matches the trajectory reading. Izuku slings the binocular strap over his head before bringing the lens to his eyes. It takes some twisting of magnifying dials to zoom in, but he manages to get a better look with them. The pirate's head turns, noticing him. It's a cephalopodic face, the mantle of an octopus, tentacles trimming the bottom like a beard. Izuku whimpers when the steel sword raised above him glints in the sun, the villain's shadow enveloping him in darkness to see its sharpness all the better. The pirate cocks his boot back, winding up, and then kicks Izuku in the side with his pointed foot. Izuku tastes the bitter salt in the ocean air when his mouth parts to gasp. He recognizes the Saracen skin covered in papillae bumps. He remembers the siphon-like mouth and the leather cap atop the pirate's head. Izuku closes his mouth, jaw tightening and teeth grinding together. Through seething breaths, he growls the villain's name that he committed to memory, Innsmouth. Vegeta. Izuku watches as his pet dog plants its paws into the pier's planks to stand its ground between him and Innsmouth. The little orange animal snarls with as much intimidation as it can muster, while protectively placing itself between the criminal and its owner. Vegeta barks between growls, baring his fangs. The pirate hesitates, taken aback by the tiny creature's ferocity, but quickly recovers with his own tenacity. "Why, you little mutt." The villain points his weapon downwards and thrusts it forward. The jab makes the blade spear Vegeta, eliciting a yelp from the small canine. "Vegeta." Izuku shrieks as he catches his wounded pet in his arms. Tears stream out in large sprays like the blood spewing from the dog's injury. Izuku rolls over to get on his hands and knees, one arm clutching Vegeta close to his chest so that he can make an effort to crawl away. The next yowl of agony comes from the blade passing through the boy's back and out the other end, stabbing into Vegeta a second time. "Damn dogs and kids." The villain withdraws his sword, and more blood leaks through the planks of the pier. He brings his blade back down so that it lances through Izuku's shoulder in order to express his rage. I can't stand them. Izuku howls in torment as he holds Pochita close to him, their life liquids mixing into a sopping mess of red. The dagger cuts through them both a few more times, chopping at the boy and his pet until their breaths turn as ragged as their bodies. Izuku feels his lungs pulling for all they're worth to draw in oxygen. Lethargically long intakes and outtakes of air leave him panting, the boy quickly becoming winded. He has a hand placed over his chest where he can feel his heart pounding into his palm. Izuku wraps his fingers around Pochita's tail, holding it as tight as he can. He's still gasping. It's hard to breathe. Midoriya, are you okay? A cool compress lathers his shoulder. Chills course throughout his body from the sudden cold contact. It makes him inhale sharply, but the flow of oxygen regulates back to normal, like a much-needed reboot to his startled system. Izuku swivels his head to see that a hand is gripping his shoulder. From swimming, Asui stands in the doorframe with water dripping onto the floor. Sirius follows behind her, pushing her way through the door and into the room. She's also drenched, slick in her bathing suit. What's going on? The heroine pauses to assess the situation before taking the binoculars from Izuku. I'm pretty sure we found our stowaway smugglers. Izuku shrugs off Asui's moist touch and steps up to the control console so he can check the radar again. The blip is still within their radius, meaning the boat hasn't gotten away yet. Sirius brings the binoculars up to her eyes, peering through them to see for herself what Izuku had spotted. Holy shit, the heroine swears under her breath before swallowing down any other curses and tossing the binoculars to Asui. They sure look like pirates. She then grabs the radio to use the comm line. We'll notify the Coast Guard and inform Captain Selkie. That's it. They'll be gone before anybody can arrive. Izuku clings to Pochita's tail while still eyeing the ship's radar system. The blip is gradually gaining distance and will soon be out of range soon enough. Sirius shakes her head. We can't act of our own accord. Not without Captain's orders. Especially you two only being interns. Izuku shares a glance with Asui, seeking her support on the matter. The greenette averts her gaze. He falters before looking back towards their superior. Sirius stays occupied tending to the comm system that she doesn't notice him beginning to back away. Realizing he's on his own, Izuku turns his back on them before wandering out of the room. It's not until Asui makes a croaking noise that Sirius realizes he's left. Sirius does a double take, stepping away from comms. When the radio buzzes to indicate she's made contact with the Coast Guard, she pauses. Froppy. Go after him. Sirius flicks a finger in the direction of the door to pass the problem onto her subordinate. She then returns to the transmission system, slipping on a headset to communicate properly. Asui nods with an affirmative ribbit. When she pursues Izuku, however, she finds him not far off from the exit of the room. He leans with his arms on the ship's railing, staring out at the open sea where the smuggler's ship sails. He turns his head ever so slightly to fix her with a sideways glance. Asui stops, taken aback. Earlier, you asked me if I was okay. I'm not. Izuku still clings to the tiny string that dangles from his chest as he confides in her. I told you I miss my dog. I didn't tell you the reason why is because that guy out there is the one who took him from me. Izuku's gaze hardens when he redirects it back towards the smuggler's ship. I'm sorry, Asui cautiously approaches him until they're side by side, but even so, aside from quirk law, it's not like you could reach him, even if you wanted to. She gently grabs his arm in an effort to console him. But she quickly draws her hand back when Izuku's glare flicks towards her. Are you forgetting the reason I came here was to learn how to reach bad guys who are out of reach? The same level of intensity in his eyes is also in his voice. Asui stumbles back, suddenly sensing something akin to bloodlust. Her eyes are drawn to the ripcord he's been gripping. He has a finger looped through the handle's hole. The ropes catch and slide through Izuku's hands, making him hiss. Nevertheless, he sees how much control the lines have over the ship's steering and sense of direction. The boat departs from the harbor with a swift turn. The thin wires are given power through his arms as they flex to maintain a firm foundation. Well, I figured it out. It comes eroding from the center of Izuku's face, the bursting brattle of a chainsaw, caustic and loud. Arteries are ruptured as they're torn open even further, various blood jets spraying ubiquitously. The metallic malformation of his head turning into an engine of violence glistens under the slick shade of crimson. When arm bars sprout from his arms, the chains skirt off from their rotation. Ending with a crack of sparks more coercive than the snap of a whip, the sharp links of steel lasso into lengthened extensions. Izuku upswings the fetters so that they slice through the air. Grappling over a vast stretch of water until clearing the distance between boats, the chains hook inwards so that they are able to latch onto the smuggler's ship. Izuku's feet fly off from the deck as he's pulled away by the boat he snagged with his impromptu fishing line. His heels hit the water when he goes over the ship's side, catching an updrift of sea spray. Carried by his chain cables, Izuku skims the surface of the ocean. Droplets of drool mingle with specks of water when his metal maw opens up for his elongated tongue to flop in the wind. Surf's up. Izuku cackles with glee while the boat pulls him behind it. Innsmouth's barbed beard swishes with his head when he looks back from the ship's steering wheel. No. Not you. A spittle spray of ink spills from his siphon-like mouth as he utters his disbelief. The tentacle appendages that make up his arms quiver, suction cups releasing the helm, one of the trembling limbs a shade lighter than the rest. He clutches the tendril with another, it's a memento from his first encounter with Izuku. Glad you remember me, Octopussy. Izuku leans on the chains he's using as reins to stay with the boat. I wouldn't be satisfied carving you into calamari if you didn't. You little, Innsmouth draws his sword from its sheath. Autopilot engages so that the tiller can allow for the navigation system to be left unattended. The pirate stomps forwards with pointed boots until he reaches the back of the boat. Once there, Innsmouth raises his cutlass so that he can chop down in an effort to hack away the chains Izuku uses to drag himself along for the ride. Steel clashes with steel. Izuku's chains rattle as the sword grinds along their front end. Innsmouth slashes with his cutlass, trying to cut across. The fetters don't snap. To make matters worse for the pirate, Izuku begins reeling himself in. Brothers. Innsmouth calls for his siblings to join him. Hearing their captain's tone filled with panic, the crew comes quickly. Innsmouth raises his sword so that its tip points at Izuku. Kill him. Ha! Izuku guffaws when he sees the band of misfits rushing about in an effort to stop him. You're gonna need something better than that thin little stick you call a sword if you want to cut me down. Oh, we got something for you, brat. One of the squids hoists a large metal cylinder over their shoulders. It's only when the weapon is leveled that Izuku realizes it's a harpoon. Try this on for size. Whoa. Izuku tugs on his chains so that he glides to the right in order to avoid the thick spear. A crash of water from the impact behind him splashes his back. Again. Innsmouth barks his orders for them to reload the gun. The squids load a metal rod into the chamber before aiming it for a second shot. Fire. And they shoot it. This time, Izuku takes the harpoon square in the stomach. He's speared through his gut, pointed end coming out the other side of him. Pulled down by the drag force and taken with the momentum, his chains rip off the boat's trimming as he's hauled under the sea surface. Innsmouth gives a giddy shout with the rest of his crew when Izuku is carried deep beneath the water. Red blots blue as blood rushes to the top of the ocean. As Izuku sinks, he thinks about how he's been here before. The first time, Pichita had bailed him out. Maybe the Wonder Dog can do it again. Izuku reaches for the string floating with a trail of bubbles behind it. The cold depths of the ocean recedes when a warmth comes from his heart. Heat spreads throughout his body as he gives the ripcord a good tug. The chainsaws rev back to life, his amber orbs for eyes radiating a rejuvenated glow. Innsmouth and his crew celebrate with high fives and hearty laughs. One squid slings an arm over the other's shoulders, swaying with their sibling. Booted feet step and slide around the boat's floor as they dance around it. The slick but solid surface collects a series of thuds. Not just from their stomping though. Splitting polyethylene as it carves its way through the bottom of the boat, a chainsaw springs a leak by piercing the deck. Innsmouth's shout becomes one of terror, followed by equally horrified screeches from his squid siblings. The flooring gets shredded from underneath until a person-sized hole is torn into the freeboard. Izuku climbs out from the opening, one leg hoisted over the other so that he can pull himself up. He's the one who's laughing now. The squids cower from the boy's crazed state, alarmed that he has the harpoon spear still protruding from him all the while. What are you doing? Get him. Innsmouth swings his cutlass haphazardly in a panic. Izuku deflects the blade with a chainsaw, manacles now ribboned to the bars. Sparks spray from the collision with a resounding scrape of sharpened steel. One of the squids plucks a flintlock pistol from its holster before firing a bullet into Izuku's knee. Izuku cries out as he's forced down to a squat. While he's crouched though, he retaliates with a swipe of his chainsaws. The metallic teeth bite the squid's calf. An eye for an eye, or rather, a leg for a leg. Another of the pirate spears Izuku's side. Between two of his ribs, the blade digs deep. Izuku grunts and growls before lacerating the squid's tentacle arms. Blood splatters the deck and boots squeak as the rest advance on him. A roar erupts from the boy. Chainsaws flare up and down, cutting and slicing, the squids having made the mistake of getting too close. In's backs away, the cutlass in his hand shaking. He eventually finds himself with nowhere left to go. His back is pressed up against the steering wheel of the ship. Izuku finishes off his siblings, leaving them with wounds that won't kill them, but that certainly puts them out of commission. Then, with a limp that slurs his movements to a slow sway, Izuku comes for the captain of the pirates. And now, listen here. Listen, boy, don't do anything rash. In's waves his sword about in an effort to fend off Izuku, but the threats are seemingly empty, as they do nothing to stop the advancement. With no other options, the pirate resorts to the last trick he has up his sleeve. Liquid gushes up his throat before breaching the surface of his siphon-like mouth. A stream of ink shoots out. Izuku instinctively raises his arms, shielding himself from most of the blackout slime with his chainsaws, but some doughs manage to cover his eyes. Knowing In's will use that opening as an opportunity to attack, he moves forward to meet his enemy head-on. The thin blade of the pirate's cutlass stabs Izuku's shoulder. He keeps going. Izuku brings his own sharpened weapons down. The chainsaws crash into the circuitry of the ship when In's ducks out of the way. A small explosion blows both fighters back. Flames destroy the tiller as the helm is engulfed in fire. The ship slows as half of it falls apart. Then, it starts to tilt. The descent of a sinking boat makes Izuku slide down more so than In's allowing the pirate to scramble back up to his feet first. Water begins rising as it flows over and fills the space. Blood coupled with salt from the ocean darkens the flooding liquid. Fire casts over everything, smoke filtering through the air. In's retrieves his cutlass, plucking it from Izuku's shoulder with a swift yank. Izuku shouts as he slashes blindly as a reflex. In's stumbles, splashing about in knee-high water. The ink covering the metal shell of Izuku's head melts away until he can peer through again. In's lashes out with a yell, sword slicing open the boy's anterior. Another cry comes from Izuku and another violent swing of his chainsaws. Another miss. In's swashes away just in the nick of time to avoid being cut. Blood seeps from Izuku's wounds, conjoining with the murky water that's now reached he and his opponent's waistline. In's feints with his cutlass before cutting Izuku again. The chainsaws that had been so full of ardor are starting to stall. Slowing their spin and sputtering like the boat's engine, they lose their power. Izuku breathes heavily, dropping down to one knee, the muddled mess of darkened water covering him to his neck when he does so. A shadow casts over him as In's moves in for the finishing blow. Got any more vile things to say now, boy? In's relishes in the moment. The pirate raises his cutlass high above his head. A breeze rustles his coat and barbed beard. Yeah, Izuku coughs before baring his fangs into a massive grin. Go fuck yourself. Effervescence surrounds the blackened water around In's before chains erupt from below him. The manacles trammel him by looping around his body in a crisscross pattern. The pirate shrieks as he's dragged down and wrapped in chains. Thanks to the bloodied water, he never saw the sneak attack coming. In's drops his sword, letting it sink. He's been caught. Izuku pushes himself up so that he stands over the villain. The horn alerts them both to the arrival of the Oki mariner. Izuku turns his head to see the incoming boat. Sirius pilots the vessel while Asui tosses a lifebuoy ring out for Izuku to catch. Selkie swims alongside his ship before boarding the remains of the pirates. The hero helps his injured intern carry the captured villain away. All the while, another hero hovers out of sight from above. Hawks watches the cleanup and the aftermath with a plaintive expression. Hidden within the mist of the clouds, he flies away. While Izuku may have freed himself with his flow of movement, Hawks knows that this stunt, without a provisional license at the very least, will reflect poorly on the boy. This is exactly the kind of opportunity Makima will capitalize on. In other words, Izuku may not be chained down anymore, but he will surely be kept on a leash. Now that will be unfortunately all for today's video, but do not worry, more will be coming soon for you to enjoy. Golden Fanfics out.